The siren does not screech in this memory. It lifts and lowers its voice like a careful kettle, and you, standing at the shop counter with the tape around your neck, let the sound slide down your spine until it becomes, improbably, a metronome. Orders arrive on paper like small, rectangular weather, stamps, signatures, a rubbery smell of official ink, and you smooth each sheet with the flat of your hand the way you'd calm a fretful hem. Blackout. Tonight, every gap goes quiet. You look up at the high street windows, bays like cheekbones, panes like teeth, and decide which ones will need the sternest lullaby. You tune the sewing machine as if it were a clock. All a whisper on the shuttle, bob and wound with a patience that could put children to sleep, treadle tested until the belt remembers it is leather and not a pet snake. A chalk stub waits beside a biscuit tin of pins, scissors rest with their jaws politely closed. The shop smells of cotton dust and soap flakes with a thin top note of gaslight, though the gas will not be invited to shine tonight. You run the tape through your fingers, 1, 2, 3, and the inches behave. The day shapes itself into tasks you can fold, measure, cut, stitch, hang, dark. They brought you the orders this morning in a sensible envelope the color of tea with too much milk. By the powers vested, said the warden, a man who knows how to make the word vested sound like a sensible hat. Windows must not leak light, doors must not glow, skylights must learn manners. In return, the city will keep its sky as anonymous as a well-behaved library. You nod, you sign, you promise your best, which is also your usual. Only tonight the usual has a siren to keep time. Mainstream fact sits at your elbow like a spool. Britain's blackout began on the evening of September 1st, 1939, hours before war was declared. Street lamps were doused, vehicle headlamps hooded, homes ordered to block all light that might guide enemy aircraft. Air raid wardens enforced the rules, knocking at doors to scold cracks of gold. Shops like yours became micro-ministries of darkness, turning cheerful parlor fabric into obedient night. You weren't drafted. You were requisitioned by the window. You start with the worst offenders, the theatrical bays that think they're the star of every pavement, the transoms that forget they exist until they leak light like gossip. A woman from number 12 brings a paper bag of ration coupons and a measurement written on the back of a bread wrapper. 5 feet wide, trouble at corners. She apologizes for the wrapper. You tell her bread is trustworthy, and she laughs with the small relief of being useful. You unroll a bolt of blackout cloth, dense, faintly tarry, too sober even for accountants, and let it drape over your arm like a stern ant. Chalk makes a pale road across its surface. The scissors travel that road without complaint. Pinning becomes a night sport. You use enough pins to make a small hedgehog and then remove half because hedgehogs do not hang well. In the half-light chalk behaves modestly. You relearn how to see by texture, the nap that turns one way, the selvage that says, here, with a tidy line. The machine begins to mumble in the low, contented way it does when the feed dogs and your hands have remembered their friendship. The stitches form a marching band with very little ego. Light joke 1. You promise the machine a promotion if it can avoid swallowing the last inch of the hem as a theatrical snack. It obliges with extreme professionalism and eats a pin instead, which you politely retrieve before it achieves glory. You trim the first curtain to length and fold a generous hem so the cloth falls like a verdict. Hooks line up like recruits. The latter leans against the bay with the theatrical sigh of a well-made prop. You climb, steady as a librarian on a high shelf, and teach the window how to close its eyes. When you draw the panel across, the room changes temperature by a thought, as if dusk had been waiting behind the fabric, patient, practical, ready to work. Your phone, black, too, as if trying to be helpful, rings with its particular, slightly indignant bell. A baker needs advice. His back door has that stained glass fanlight his grandmother loved, and now it glows like a cathedral whenever someone opens the oven. You suggest felt, you suggest bulldog clips, you suggest, with regret, a temporary surrender of beauty to survival. He agrees, likening it to putting a sensible coat over a fancy dress, and you both picture the fanlight sulking. You promise to visit after tea with a bag of clips and a roll of modesty. Historians still argue whether Blackout saved more lives by foiling navigators than it cost in accidents. Pedestrians bruised by curbs that forgot to announce themselves, motorists learning a new species of inching, house fires kindled when candles practiced arrogance. You know both truths can sit in the same room without fighting. The sky kept its secrets, and ankles discovered how many objects enjoy dusk. You keep iodine and extra plasters in a tin marked buttons, because buttons never scream in the night. The warden's knock arrives as promised. 2 polite taps, then a hello. That says he has no wish to surprise a person on a ladder. He carries a notebook, a sense of mission, and a torch fitted with a tiny slit like an eye practicing reserve. You show him your handiwork, edges overlapped, corners behaving, doors appointed with draft excluders that also discourage the theatrical instincts of light. He checks without peering, nods without smirking, and writes a remark that looks like creditable. You suspect he writes creditable often and would like to award it a medal. Quirky tidbit: to tame cheerful prints that could not be replaced, neighbors swear by homebrewed dyes. Beet water for a sullen pink, tea for a democratic brown, soot in soap for grim but efficient. Your own kettle bears witness to several experiments. The wooden spoon, once dignified, now moonlights as a paintbrush. The whole kitchen smells faintly of boiled fabric and stubbornness. When the ration book runs shy, offcuts become saviors, pinned up in mosaics that make windows look like they've enrolled in night school. Your mind keeps a map of odd windows. Skylights like flaps on a secret, stairwell slits that admit shadows like narrow guests, coal-chute glass that thinks itself beneath notice until it glows at a bad hour. You carry a paper bag of tricks, drawing pins, tape, a bulldog clip with a personal grudge against beams of light, 2 bits of ribbon saved from the before times in case a child needs a friendly shape at bedtime. Stars on walls? Lovely in daylight, treacherous at 10. You cut felt moons that clip onto lampshades so nursery constellations can retire with dignity. Light joke 2. The cat at number 8 wears a new collar painted with a dab of white so no one trips over her in the hall. She takes offense at being turned into signage and refuses to purr at official footwear. You apologize in your honorary capacity as the block's minister for fabric relations. She withholds judgment but accepts cream. You balance your ledger between stitches. Coupons subtracted, coins stacked. Receipts folded with corners aligned because alignment comforts even when money does not. Coal money waits in a jam jar labeled hush. The pencil grows tired and sulks. You bribe it with a turn in the knife's edge and it returns to duty. Outside, the bus grumbles past with its masked headlights like someone politely hiding a smile behind their hand. Mainstream aside, small but real. Headlamps were indeed hooded or fitted with slotted masks. Pedestrians carried shaded torches. Many shops painted the edges of steps and curbstones white to keep human shins from discovering new verses of lamentation. You own a tiny tin of whitewash and a brush that knows how to mind its line, and once a week you touch up the bit of curb outside your door as if blessing it. Night thickens and the machine sings the same comfortable hymn. Tack, tack, tack. A fondness for straight lines, a suspicion of haste. You pin, you pick, you fold. A neighbor pops in with a cake tin full of something we don't talk about, which turns out to be slices of the least illegal sort of cake. You share it with the warden, who pretends to be neutral about cake and fails. Light joke 3. You tell him the Blackout will be harmed if he doesn't eat his share quickly. He complies in the interest of national security. When the siren lifts its voice again, Practice only, the warden says, but everyone stands a little straighter. You walk to the door and look at your row of windows. They have learned to sleep sitting up. Light that tried to make a break for it earlier now finds itself domesticated behind heavy cloth. The street looks like a stage between scenes, scenery waiting, actors behaving, audience holding breath. You go back inside and set another seam, the way a person might tuck in a child after they roll over and forget their blanket. Before you lock up, you leave a note for tomorrow pinned to the bolt of cloth. Mrs. Hayes' skylight, bring clips. Baker's fanlight, felt. Cole's shoot at number 4, improvise. The list reads like gossip but behaves like duty. You sweep a semicolon's worth of threads into a pan and tip them into the stove, where they smolder into nothing and smell for 1 second like a very small bonfire on a polite hill. You pull your own curtains at home with a certainty you didn't own a month ago. They hang well because you have taught them to with firm affection and an iron that believes in right angles. The room becomes gentler, as if volume has been turned down on every object. The kettle puts itself to work. You sit with your feet on a footstool that mutters of ancestors and counts stitches in your head instead of stars outside. The siren is quiet now. The machine sleeps. The city holds its light in its hand like a secret. You learn to measure light the way a tailor measures breath, gently, as if the room might spook. Not lumens, not candle power, nothing with a decimal that throws elbows. You measure what sneaks past edges. Moon skim across a sash, gas goes through keyholes, that treacherous crease between roller blind and frame where a pale bead glints like a gossiping eye. Your tape, which used to speak in waistlines and hems, now converses with windowsills and architraves. You hook the brass end against a beading and draw the tape down to the floor, counting in inches as if counting sheep, and you learn that the moon favors odd measurements, 37.5 inches to the draft, 19 to the latch that will chew a curtain if not bribed with a felt pad. You start a ritual called the dim test. Lamps down to a whimper, shop doors shut, streets hush aloud in, and you stand in the middle with your hand raised, palm toward the windows like a warden's polite stop. If your fingers glow the tiniest bit, you step nearer and look for the mischief. A pinhole where the needle punched too boldly, a gap where the rod standoff keeps the cloth proud of the wall, a darling little rooster tail of daylight at the sill. Chalk rings the culprit, white halo around sin. You adjust, pin, rehang, test again. The room learns to be a pocket data customer, the sort who apologizes for existing and then pays exactly, arrives with a lantern hooded to a slit as if it were ashamed of its own usefulness. The back bedroom, she says, cheeks full of weather, holds the moon like a saucer. You nod because you know that particular problem. A high northern window that buttons the night's cardigan and still lets moonlight out at the collar. You pack a sack with the tools that answer without fuss. Tape, chalk, pins, a narrow tension rod for the rebellious middle, a length of black bias binding to coax a too cheerful edge into modesty, and you follow her upstairs that have memorized where people pause to breathe. The window is exactly as described, a solemn rectangle with opinions. The previous curtain suffers the innocent crimes of daylight sewing. Lovely, but 2 inches too shy at the sill, a hem stitched as if laughter were a measurement, hooks placed by someone fond of guesswork. You take the tape and measure the moon, which at this hour is really the shade of afternoon lying in wait. Hook to floor, recess to recess, reveal to rod. You mutter numbers like a conjurer while your pencil scratches them into the notebook that previously hosted waistlines. Light joke 1. You tell the moon that if it wants to be looked at, it can enroll in a theater. The moon, with the confidence of an old actor, refuses to audition. Mainstream fact sits neatly on the sill. Blackout regulations demanded. No visible light. From windows and doors after lighting up time, with civil defense pamphlets demonstrating how even slivers could guide navigators. Wardens were empowered to admonish, fine, or in persistent cases report householders. That is why your tape has become a leash for photons. You measure not the view but the escape routes. You add a curtain within a curtain, a liner skirt. You call it to please the lady and your own sense of couture. A narrow inner panel hung on a secret rod tucked just inside the frame, cut longer than dignity requires so it puddles an inch and seals like a letter pressed with a signet. The outer drape remains handsome, the inner does the work. You demonstrate the draw, outer first, inner last, inner first, outer last, either way, no halo. The lady smiles the slow smile of someone whose sleep has been given back. You cross town to a row of bay windows that behave like toddlers at bedtime, each pane a separate argument. You measure the angles with a dressmaker's square that used to be vain about shoulders and now minds cornices. For the side returns, you cut little wings of cloth that button against the wall with tape snaps, making the bay less of a stage and more of a padded cell for light. Chalk rules strike diagonals across the bolt. Scissors obey. The machine murmurs. Hooks find their arithmetic. When it is hung, the bay stops being a gossip and becomes a confidant. The street outside looks grateful. Between calls you invent tests. The penny slit. A coin stood on its edge at the sill to see if it casts the faintest portrait of itself. The hand bridge. Palm arched over a latch to sense a cool whisper in the gap. The paper draw. A scrap tugged between cloth and wall. If it slides free too merrily, the overlap needs a stern word. Quirky tidbit arrives from a tailor down the road who swears by a dab of glycerin on the edge of a wooden rod to make cloth behave like it adores compliance. You try it, approve, and add small medicine bottle to the shop's new pharmacopoeia of darkness. Sometimes measuring moonlight means measuring silence. You stand in a nursery where stars, painted with love and poor timing, glimmer just enough to annoy a warden. You listen to the room, which has learned to whisper so as not to wake a child, and you pin felt shapes over each painted star, clouds that clip on, moons that pretend to set. The child, deputized as inspector, lies on the rug and pronounces the sky sleepy enough. You write the phrase in your notebook as if it were a British standard. Historians still argue whether. You begin to think, pulling a thread through your teeth. The blackout's strictness truly confused pilots in the later war years when radar and pathfinding improved, or whether its largest value was psychological, habit training millions to take orders seriously, to cooperate, to turn a city into a single object with one posture. You decide not to choose. Either way, your tape has made new citizens out of windows. The warden pays his rounds under a weather cape that flaps like a sensible bat. He demonstrates the official lightly card, a small rectangle he holds at arm's length. If he can see a pale echo of it in your window, you must fuss again. You pass at first look, which he records with the admirable brevity of a man who enjoys order as a hobby. Light joke too, you offer to embroider. Pass first go. On his sleeve, he counters with, perhaps a discreet cuff monogram. And the two of you shake on a truce between enthusiasm and uniform regulations. You refuse to be bullied by skylights. There's show-offs of daylight and sulkers at night. You take measurements crawling on a landing, the tape falling like a ribbon down the well. The solution is pleated linings that concertina against the frame by day and button down by night. 2 tabs, for snaps, and a stern talk with gravity. You install them at tea time and return after dusk to perform the palm test. No halo. The house breathes without advertising itself. In shops you measure glass that sells things, door panels, transoms, vitrines with ideas above their station. For a grocer, you cut blackout skirts that hang from spring rods just inside the glass, lifting by day like tutus, dropping at night like law. For a chemist, you make a patchwork of offcuts that clips to the ornate leaded lights without offending the stained glass angels, who are given the night off from glowing. For your own door, you paint the single step's edge white and measure the improvement in bruised shins by a staggering decline in unhappy language from callers. Mainstream aside, many streets did exactly this. White steps, white curbs, the city teaching itself to be navigated by modest arithmetic. Clients bring complications inside envelopes. One man produces a sketch of a round window like a ship's porthole lodged in a Victorian fantasy. You listen, measure with tape and string, and return with a circular shade made of blackout felt that snaps to a ring, a modest eclipse at the touch of a thumb. Another presents a narrow pane in a coal-chute door that leaks light like a confession. You cut a small square of cloth with a magnet sewn into each corner, and the problem solves itself with a click. The city collects such inventions and credits the ministry, but you know the ministry's R&D department is really a worktable in your back room. Light joke 3. Your tape develops opinions about drama and begins to snap back into its case with a flourish. You inform it that blackout work is not a theatrical engagement. It retaliates by biting your thumb. You appeal to natural justice and get on with it.in your ledger. You start noting moon measures. How much longer than the recess the cloth needs to be to stifle a specific kind of leak. For a north-facing bay, 2 inches beyond the sill. For a south-facing sash with a nosy lamppost, 3.5, plus a felt strip behind the meeting rail. For a door with scrolled glazing, a skirt that kisses the floor, and a draft excluder that stops gossip at ankle height. The page begins to look like a new tailoring for rooms, hips padded, shoulders softened, collars turned down. The city teaches your eyes tricks. Clouds change the amount of fuss a window needs. A clear sky begs more cloth than a sky like dishwater. Snow, when it comes, turns everything into a diffused lamp and makes even a pinhole look theatrical. You double measure in snow. Fog is generous. You accept the gift, but do not write policy on it. Wind presses cloth against frames and reveals where a hook complains. You note the rattle and pencil. Add 2 in the margin. Your tape rattles like a tame snake and learns to forgive drafts if you promise an extra snap. Historians still argue whether householders' ingenuity, tea-dye, off-up mosaics, homemade rollers, deserves more credit than official supply for making blackout practical, whether the true engine of compliance was fear of fines or pride in doing a job plainly, whether cities that had trained under blackout recovered faster when the lights came back because the habit of small collective acts already lived in their hands. You thread a needle and decide, as always, that answers are usually stitched from both sides. At days end you perform the shop's own dim test. Lamps to a murmur, door closed, your hand before the window like a blessing. Nothing glows that shouldn't. You measure the quiet for a moment, 8, 10 heartbeats, and it fits. The tape, which has worked like a well-behaved serpent all day, curls itself into its case with a sigh you choose to interpret as gratitude. You hang it on its hook beside the chalk and the scissors and write in the daybook. Measured the moon in 5 houses, found it modest in 3, ambitious in 2, tamed all. Then you lock up and walk home along a pavement that has learned to be careful. A bus slides by like a submarine with manners. Steps gleam white where someone with a brush loves strangers. Overhead, somewhere invisible, an aircraft fails to find a friendly glint and passes on. Your curtains at home, widened by an inch last week, close with a deeper exhale than before. You set the kettle, lay the tape across the table like a sleeping cat, and think, for a small soft moment, that you have sewn the night a better coat. Bolts do not arrive by desire. They arrive by docket and rumor. You keep the day's supply book open like a hymn and pencil its margins with the kind of numbers that don't shout. Feet left on the roll, inches promised to Mrs. Bennet's obstreperous bay, selvaged widths that will matter when a corner decides to be awkward. But fabric has learned wartime manners. It comes shorter, narrower, stingier about its drape, and you, with the tape around your neck like a kindly leash, turn scarcity into pattern. The counter hosts a small congress each morning. Coupons, coins, and Q whispers sit down together and negotiate. The ration book rides in every pocket now, thick with the nervous authority of perforations. You ease it open to the clothing pages, the ones that smell faintly of wet wool and pencil shavings. Dress material? You ask, and the hand across from you taps a square that once stood for summer frocks and now must become night. Coupons take the place of elbow room. Off the roll comes a fathom of blackout cloth that thinks in terms of obedience rather than drape, and you count 1, 2, 3 coupons, snipped with as much ceremony as you would give a christening ribbon. The customer exhales as though the coupons were breath. Mainstream fact settles its sensible weight on the counter. Britain introduced clothing rationing in 1941. Coupons governing not only coats and skirts but yard goods. The utility scheme. CC 41 stamped like a tidy rebus. Promise fair quality at fixed prices. Make do and mend. Pamphlets arrived with their brisk illustrations. Turn sheets, patch elbows, unpick hems, befriend darning. You make friends with all of it. A blackout curtain is not clothing, quite, but dress lengths and furnishing materials dance the same coupon quadrille, and the ministry's arithmetic finds its way into your shears. The queue outside is unconfidently patient. Someone swears they saw a bolt of navy serge at the draper's 2 streets over. Someone else has a cousin who unpicked his mother's winter coat and lined 3 windows before anyone noticed the coat had become an argument. You don't trade in gossip, you trade in offcuts. From beneath the counter you lift a basket labeled useful. A small museum of salvage, strips for side returns, triangles for awkward bays, narrow selvage lengths for hems that must learn to behave without asking for more. Customers lean in as if you were sharing cake. You portion out the cake with a needle. You turn into a quartermaster of shadow. Yardage is rationed. Time is rationed. Your kindness, though, seems to grow in the rationing. A woman brings a roll of something that was once cheerful, roses that haven't learned discretion, and asks in a voice like daylight whether there's hope. You steep a cloth sample in a teapot. The shop has demoted from tea to chemistry. Black tea darkens cocky pink to a respectable bruise. You add a whisper of stove soot to a scullery bowl and test a hush over the roses. You write, beet water equals sulky mauve, in your notebook because science likes a little gossip too. Light joke 1. You award your teapot the rank of die captain. It bubbles on the hob with the smugness of a newly commissioned officer. There's a barter economy at the pins and needles level. Mrs. Patel has extra bias binding. Mr. Hughes has more hooks than windows. The baker has awkwardly generous paper, perfect for patterns. You have thread in 3 colors nobody admits to liking. You draw up a ledger of swaps that would make a quartermaster salute. Bindings out, hooks in, paper via custard creams. Coins still change hands, but coupons and kindness carry more weight than either. If a neighbor's ration page shakes inside a mitten, you steady it with your finger and say, "We'll do what we can." Historians still argue whether rationing leveled class or merely taught new manners to old inequalities. Did coupons make dukes queue beside dockers? Or did the black market quietly reassert the pecking order behind shop doors? They also debate whether the utility mark democratized quality or merely standardized disappointment. You tidy your opinions into a pin tin and get on with it. Inside your 4 walls, fairness is measured in inches, not titles. The same seam allowance for everyone, the same stern hem where light thinks it can gossip. Inventory grows clever under pressure. You list fabric not only by yard but by purpose. Bays, skylights, door skirts, improvisations. You keep a special shelf for odd windows, labeled with bits of string tied round sample rolls. 1 knot for the coal chute square, 2 for the nursery porthole, 3 for that baffling trapezoid that lives above a tobacconist's cupboard. The knots make a language your hands read faster than your eyes. A greengrocer comes in with a folded paper that smells of apples. He needs to baffle the glow from his warming cupboard before the warden learns to sniff. You sell him a length of compliance that looks like modest cloth and behaves like law. Quirky tidbit becomes shop policy. You weigh buttons. Not for sale, for thread. The ministry's pamphlet recommends unpicking old garments to reclaim linen for patches and wool for darning. You go further and put buttons on the scale to guess how much cotton thread their original life probably consumed. It's nonsense as mathematics and perfect as ritual. You scrawl in the margin. 6 small bone buttons equals 1 window tie back. Romantic. Romance, ration like everything else, is cheaper when made of bone. Offcuts do not go to waste. They become citizenship. You piece them into patch panels for transoms, tiny quilts that the light looks at and decides are not worth the conversation. Children are deputized with blunt needles to baste long straight lines. They bend their tongues in concentration and become stitch competent before dinner. A boy suggests sewing pennies into the hem to keep a door skirt from kicking. You test it, approve, and later remove the pennies to preserve national finance. Light joke 2, you replace them with washers and inform the Treasury that you've done your duty. The Treasury, busy with larger sums, sends no cake. You work inside prices that have stopped pretending to be fair. Cloth costs more because it is scarce. Coupons cost everything because they are not money. You keep a coal jar behind the till, where change that would buy half a scuttle goes to become warmth for the shop's one stove. Customers add to it as if it were a church plate. You add hooks to their parcels in exchange. The jar says, "Hush," in white paint and keeps its voice down. Mainstream aside, earnest but drowsy, the Ministry of Information's 1943. Make do and mend. Campaign turned thrift into virtue with leaflets and touring talks. Posters showed smiling women turning old into new. In your corner, mending turns print into night and offcuts into policy. You never could have imagined, before the sirens, that you'd teach a city to sleep by handing out ribbon and binders. Now you cannot imagine not doing it. Your pencil becomes a diplomat. Where once you wrote, "Silk 8 yards," you now write, "Utility twill, 3/3/4, coupons, 4, Mrs. M's roses, tea plus soot, 30 minutes. The ledger reads like a cookbook for darkness. You record failures too. Violet refuses to repent. Polka dot sulk through 2 coats. Chintz behaves like a gossip even after the second scolding. You do not tell the customers the failures. You simply promise to keep the moon on a leash. Sometimes the shop's back room is an embassy. A woman arrives with a parcel wrapped in a newspaper that last week argued with itself about the war. She unties the string and reveals a length of velvet so lovely it makes your throat sting. You stroke it once, strictly for professional reasons, and suggest a lining strategy that will keep it safe until velvet can be frivolous again. You cut her blackout from utility serge and hide your sigh under pins. She thanks you with a slice of something she refuses to call cake. You invite the velvet to wait. It agrees with regal patience. The black market passes by like weather you acknowledge without walking out into. A man loiters with murmurs about real blackout cloth, no coupons. And you prove surprisingly deaf for someone with excellent hearing. You close the door a trifle, hang a sign that says, "Back soon," and count your pins until his footsteps grow smaller. Historians still argue whether the underground economy kept households alive or simply taught some people to be clever at others' expense. Your shop answers with needle and docket and shuts the window on whispers. Light joke 3, you consider writing your own pamphlet. Make do and mend your neighbor's windows too, with chapters on convincing cats to respect door skirts, and how to gather felt clouds without offending the moon. You draft a cover in pencil, Draw a tiny CC41 in the corner as if your pamphlet were dignified enough to join the scheme, and then put it under the blotter where good ideas NAP.BY afternoon. The off-cut basket is light and the coupon tin heavy with absence. You mount a small campaign, Salvage Day. Customers bring what they can bear to part with, frayed drapes, a gentleman's waistcoat whose back still has loyalty, ticking that used to love mattresses, and you sort like a grocer grading apples. Good for linings. Excellent for door lungs. Heroic for skylights. You place a saucer labeled "Free, but say thank you" next to the heap. Thank yous turn out to be a currency more contagious than any rumor. You turn the bell above the door to mute for an hour and do arithmetic in cloth. 2 bays in a stairwell, if you piece the hems from selvage and accept a hint of mongrel in the dye. A door skirt and a coal chute square if you bind a raw edge with the olive tape that pretends to be green only in better light. A shopfront transom patchwork if the offcuts will agree not to argue when neighbors meet. You smile at the counter like a conductor who knows a disreputable orchestra can still play a lullaby. Evening slides its hand across the high street, gentle but firm. The queue thins, the last coupons go home tucked between glove and palm, and you sweep the day's confetti, threads, chalk, a stubborn pin, into the hearth where small fires conclude small stories. You write in the ledger: coupons, honest, cloth, adequate, gossip, mostly helpful. You turn the sign to closed, promise the bolts you'll be back in the morning, and cradle the off-cut basket like a cat. It purrs in the language of salvage. On the walk home you see your work in negative. Windows that used to preen now practice humility. Bays bow their heads. Transoms shrug and accept the discipline of snaps. A child in a 4th-floor nursery presses a felt moon to the glass and pretends it sticks. The warden, cape lifted by a small theatrically helpful wind, tips his hat at your curb, that white lip you paint for shins, and does not need to knock. The blackout is holding. Your pockets are lighter. Your hands smell of tea and cloth and a kind of arithmetic that makes sleep lawful. Odd windows are really just windows with hobbies. They tilt, they jut, they sprout triangles where rectangles were expected, and they greet the tape measure with a coy angle as if flirting with geometry. You spread brown pattern paper over the shop table and it crinkles like a good idea. The pencil sits obediently in your hand, its point at the exact temperament for persuasion. Bays, skylights, coal chute panes, each announces itself as a riddle that would prefer to be solved with pins rather than proofs. For a bay that bends like a courteous elbow, you draft in segments. Tape along the ceiling cornice, a soft tug along the soffit, fingers feeling for the place where plaster turns opinionated. You set a centerline on the paper and drop tangents outward, small triangles that will become side returns. The dressmaker's square, long retired from shoulder seams, finds new dignity in measuring reveals. The French curve, once vain about lapels, now kisses the arc where wall forgets straightness. You mark, hinge here, and hook there, the way a cartographer names bays and headlands. When you lay the paper against the bay and it sits without sulking, you know the cloth will follow. The skylight is a different beast, the optimist of daytime and the gossip of night. You kneel on the landing with your tape like a ribbon and your patience like a cushion. The frame lives a thumb's width out of square, as frames do when carpenters worked after lunch, so your pattern refuses perfection on purpose. You allow a 1/4 inch for manners, another for humidity, and you write it in the margin as if explaining a recipe to your future self. Allow slack, gravity is a critic. The solution, you've learned, is a concertina lining that buttons down at dusk and retreats at dawn, pleats like a polite fan. You punch tiny paper circles where snaps will sit, then tap their positions onto the timber with the pencil's blunt end. A drummer marking time only would understands. Coal chute glass pretends it isn't part of the conversation. A postage stamp of light at ankle height that wakes the warden's sixth sense. For these you cut a pattern with a wink. 2 layers of blackout felt fused with an interlining of stiff ticking, magnets hand-sewn in the corners. The paper template is a square with ambition. You round the corners with the teacup that retired from tea to join engineering, then label it. Clicks on, clicks off. Which is not formal drafting, but it does the job. Mainstream fact leans over your shoulder like a civil defense pamphlet. The Home Office issued detailed leaflets in 1939 and 1940 with diagrams for screening skylights, fanlights, and odd apertures. Roof lights should be shaded, it said with unflappable prose, recommending blinds, boards, or paint where cloth was impractical. Air raid wardens carried that prose into parlors and stairwells, asking eccentric pains to behave. Your patterns are simply the polite version of regulation. Paper is a forgiving teacher. You pin a test muslin to the baize rod and it sighs into place. You chalk where the return fails its duty. You add a small gusset shaped like a slice of custard tart, and the fold behaves. For a triangular attic window that looks like a sailor's pennant, you draft 2 right angles onto paper, and then soften one with bias binding so it doesn't pick fights with the beam. You note bias, not brute force, in the gutter of your notebook and promise to remember. Light joke 1. You tell the triangle you can't be bribed with trigonometry. It responds by existing at 47 degrees out of spite. When cloth takes the stage, paper bows and leaves. You choose a utility twill that falls like a well-mannered curtain and cut with the scissors' long stride. Seams that must turn tight corners learn to live on the bias. Hems that must kiss a sill without gossip receive a whisper of lead tape ladder stitched into place. Enough weight to discourage theatrics, not enough to dent dignity. You hide fixings where eyes can't find them. A secret rod inside the bay, snaps painted lampblack, a felted saddle atop a skylight bar so the concertina rides without squeaks. It is tailoring, really, only the client is a room and the fitting is at dusk. Quirky tidbit becomes a shop superstition. For awkward arches, you make paper, petticoats, out of flour paste and newspaper, thin crescent templates that stick just long enough to trace a faithful curve and peel away without flouncing. The paste smells like kitchen memories and victory over geometry. On one memorable afternoon, you softened a cracked gramophone record over steam and pressed it gently into service as a temporary arch guide. The record, grateful for a second career, cooled with a dignified sigh and kept its radius long enough for chalk to learn. The warden appears, as if conjured by the word arch, and peers through his slit torch at your new bay. He performs the palm test, hand lifted, fingers toward the seam, and the room refuses to glow. Creditably done, he writes, which is his way of saying better than good without starting a habit of compliments. You point out the hidden clip that tames the side return when a wind thinks itself clever. He writes nothing about cleverness, only taps the clip as if knighting it. You keep a drawer labeled Patterns That Taught Us Manners, a fat folio of brown paper riddled with notes. Do not trust this wall. Add 2 for rainy Tuesdays. Mrs. D.S. Skylight likes to argue. Bring extra snaps. The pages grow tearings and soap smudges and a lifetime of pencil amendments. In quiet minutes you copy your favorites clean onto new paper, because paper is mortal and you intend to leave scents behind you like a trail of breadcrumbs. The drawer smells faintly of graphite and perseverance. Historians still argue whether wartime improvisation left a permanent mark on British domestic design, whether Blackout's age of ingenious fittings and honest utility nudged interiors toward functional modernism, or whether the nation sprang back to chintz the moment lampshades felt safe. They point to post-war magazines filled with cheerful florals, and then to the quiet persistence of roller blinds and simple rods. You thread a needle and decide the house learned 2 languages and kept both, one for necessary nights, one for afternoons that forgave excess. You field commissions that sound like riddles. A fishmonger's shopfront boasts a half-moon of glass over the door, You pattern a felt crescent with a hinge of tape and 2 discrete hooks, a lunar eclipse at the tug of a finger. A tobacconist presents a narrow lozenge of glazing shaped like an opinion. You cut an oval from Blackout serge and teach it to behave with 4 proud paupers. A church vestry, of all places, hides a skylight behind a coffered ceiling. You pattern in sections, each square a tiny sermon on discretion, the whole thing fastening like a hymn book. Light joke 2, you consider charging by geometry. 2 shillings for rectangles, a hazard fee for polygons, but the ledger prefers not to laugh. When you mount your patterns in customers' homes, you do so with the bedside manner of a night nurse. Breathe, you tell the room, cracking a vent behind a pelmet. Stand up straight, you tell a sulky rod, shimming its bracket with a trimmed matchstick. Close your eyes, you tell the skylight, buttoning snaps and pairs so the cloth sleeps evenly. The family gathers behind you like a small tribunal. You perform the dim test, nothing glows, someone's shoulders drop. You leave a paper tag pinned to the lining. Left first, then right, not because they cannot remember but because instructions on paper look like amulets. Mainstream aside, chalked in the margin, some factories painted roof glass with darkened dope or bituminous paint rather than so. Others installed louvres and baffles. Homes were told not to paint permanently. Cleaning would be a penance, so cloth ruled the domestic night. You speculate, quietly, that paint never had to listen to a toddler argue with bedtime. Cloth negotiates elegant truces. Light loves habits, and you learn them neighborhood by neighborhood. On a terrace facing east, sunrise tries to flee through keyholes. You pattern a leather tab that slips behind the escutcheon, a tiny door eyelid. Around the corner, a street lamp stands too close to a bay and proposes mischief at 10 p.m. You lengthen the returns and add a soft felt cheek at the jamb so the lamp must mutter elsewhere. In courts where alleys funnel wind, you enlarge hems and weight them discreetly so gusts don't pantomime your work to passing wardens. Light joke 3. Your pattern paper acquires ideas about theater and insists on unfurling dramatically across the entire table whenever a customer enters. You scold it. We are not at Drury Lane. And it curls back with a sigh that implies poor casting. By evening your hands have memorized a dozen odd shapes, and your ear has learned which window is about to confess. You fill the broom cupboard with rolled brown scrolls, each labeled in tidy capitals. You tuck the best templates under oilskin in case of drizzle. You fold the smaller ones into an envelope marked Coles, Shoot and Company. You wash paste off the teacup and return it to the saucer with a pat, thanking it for its curve. The shop smells of cloth warm from the iron, paper warm from your palm, graphite soft as dusk. On the walk home you pass facades that used to perform and now simply live. Bays you taught a kinder posture turn their shoulders inward, keeping their families. Skylights you persuaded with pleats sit domesticated under a sky that will not be entertained tonight. Coal chute doors close their bright little mouths. The blackout holds, not like a threat but like an agreement drawn carefully on brown paper and signed in tidy pencil. We will sleep without glowing. We will wake with windows that remember how. Half-light is honest. It hides nothing from fingers, only from eyes that insist on showing off. You ease the shop lamps down to a cordial murmur and let dusk pour through the front window until everything on the table has a soft edge. The pincushion like a small tame hedgehog, the chalk like a thumb of moon, the safety pins blinking a polite pewter along the rim of a saucer. In this light, haste has no place to hide. Thread that would rush in daylight amidst its knots. Cloth that preens at noon settles, amidst its grain, and invites you to work at the tempo of breathing. You begin with a pin drill your grandmother would approve of. Pick up, place, count to 3, release. Safety pins, not their sharper cousins, because blackout cloth likes to be corded, not poked. You keep a small fleet organized by size, little for hems, middling for side returns, stalwart for door skirts. and they live on a ribbon like metals. Chalk walks in front of them, drawing small roadways where seams will live, herringbone here, topstitch there, a quiet line whose dignity is that it may be hidden forever behind the curtain's diplomacy. You chalk with the side, not the point, because lines deserve softness when the night is learning to arrive. The half-light finds sins as gently as a friend who prefers whispers. You hold the pin panel up to the window, stand behind it, and let the room's pale breath show you where the edge wobbles. If a pin looks like it's thinking of violence, you replace it with one that has better manners. If a fold insists on saying, "Look at me," you chalk a second line a finger's width inside and pin to that instead. It is all negotiation, cloth persuading wall, pins persuading cloth, you persuading impatience to go boil the kettle. Light joke 1. You tell the pins they are not bayonets. They promise to stop marching and start curtsying. Mainstream fact balances on the saucer beside the pins. Blackout cloth sold commercially in wartime was often dense, rubberized, or closely woven, sometimes called black sateen, or blackout lining, and households were urged to use it or improvise with heavy materials, blankets, rugs, secured with drawing pins, tapes, or safety pins. Government pamphlets warned that even a chink could aid navigation. Safety pins, cheap, reusable, became small tools of national policy, tucked into biscuit tins and sewing rolls across streets that had never previously sworn allegiance to hardware. You smile at your saucer of pewter and imagine a medal with a safety pin on its ribbon. You pin like a cartographer. Corners receive extra attention because corners are where fabric tells the truth about rooms. That wall bows a quiet inch. That sill pitches politely toward the street. That plaster cornice was grown by a plasterer with views. You answer each confession with an extra pin at the stress point, a chalk dot where a hand will remember to ease, a muttered instruction to yourself in the narrow margin of the pattern. Hum here, which is your code for slow down, this bit matters. The machine will have its say later. For now, everything is rehearsal. A customer watches you pin with the kind of attention people usually reserve for magicians pulling scarves from sleeves. Isn't it quicker to sew first and fix later? She asks. You smile, because you've met that temptation and know its breath. Blackout prefers promises, you say, and attach the last pin as if sealing a letter. When you test the panel at the window, the line falls like an apology perfectly timed, and the customer nods the nod of a person who has just remembered patience is cheaper than redoing. You offer her the chalk for the next line. She draws slowly and becomes, for a moment, a clerk of night. Chalk becomes a language without exclamation marks. Straight lines speak in sentences. Hem 2 inches, fold toward room. Curves hum quietly in parentheses. You develop symbols your hands understand at a glance. 2 short ticks for ease here, a tiny triangle for clip after stitching, a dot for the place where a hanger will like to live. In half-light the chalk glows just enough. In full dark it recedes like a good stagehand, leaving the curtain to act. Historians still argue whether the blackout's household labor has been properly counted. Hours of pinning, tacking, dyeing, adjusting, mostly done by women, folded into the broader ledger of home front work, or whether it got treated as domestic inevitability rather than civic contribution. They also debate whether the blackout taught a generation skills they carried into post-war interiors, measured fittings, respect for function, or whether everyone sprinted back to frills the moment lights returned. You set down your chalk and decide both can be true. Patience learned in crisis does not forbid a later flirtation with tassels. Your chalk box collects oddities, a stub the blue of an evening bus, a square of tailor's chalk donated by a retired jacket, a bit of schoolroom stick that writes too loudly unless you soften it against sandpaper. You test each on scraps before it touches a working scene. Chalk that tries to grandstand gets demoted to marking white curbs outside. Light joke 2. You introduce chalk to whitewash. They become colleagues, then rivals, then colleagues again. Quirky tidbit tucks itself into the pin tin. You keep a lump of beeswax for thread, a tiny whetstone for stubborn chalk, and a little cake of soap meant only for drawing on dark cloth, launderable lines. A neighbor swears by a sliver of candle end for the same job. You try it and find the line too shiny by day, too coy by night. The beeswax wins and smells quietly of summer when the shop stove argues winter. Half-light is a safety officer too. You teach apprentices the fold and palm test. Fold cloth toward the body, palm flat against the panel, fingers a spread hand away from pins, slide gently. If a pin catches, you've placed it badly. If the palm passes smooth, the pin is a citizen. You practice catching a pin mid-fall with the nonchalant thumb and forefinger of a conjurer. The floor appreciates the courtesy, and so do bare ankles later. Your saucer of pins rotates like a tiny constellation, refilled from a jam jar labeled, "Not jelly." The machine waits while pins and chalk finish their parliament. When at last you treadle, it's a low purr, the needle obliging the chalk's suggestions, the feed dogs shepherding cloth the way you promised they would. You do not sew over pins, you remove them with a rhythm as tidy as knitting. The stitches land exactly beside the chalk line as if chalk had been an advance party. Where the half-light hid nothing, the seam hides everything it should. Raw edge, pride, the small chaos all sewing contains and then makes orderly. You press the seam with a hot iron that smells like competence and wax, and the fold lies down like a scruple that's made up its mind. Mainstream aside, tucked gently into the hem, many households tacked first. Long, loose stitches easily unpicked, before sewing firm, especially when cloth was precious and unpicking meant wear. You tack when blankets become stopgaps and stitches must lift later without tears. Tacking in half-light feels like writing in pencil on a wall that will be painted tomorrow. Message received. Permanence optional. Pins also run diplomacy between neighbors. You loan a handful to the baker and a matchbox labeled 12 returned equals cake, and receive, 3 days later, 11 pins and an apologetic scone. The missing pin appears a week on, caught in the cuff of his overcoat, repentant and slightly cake-scented. You hold it up like a tiny prodigal, and the whole street applauds the return with a politeness that counts as joy. You wipe it with a rag dipped in paraffin and restore it to duty. The pin, newly humble, behaves. When you move to door skirts and draft excluders, chalk's job becomes geometry and character study. You chalk a long rectangle that will roll into a polite snake. You chalk its seam allowance with an extra whisper because doors are greedy for space. Pins mark the roll points like a dotted line for a conjurer sawing a box in half. In half-light, you can feel the bulk stable under your hand, and you pin in spirals so stuffing will distribute like scents. The result sits against the door and refuses to gossip light under the sill. There is a ceremony to unpinning that keeps the shop's pulse slow. You place each freed pin back in the saucer head first, points inward, a little troop mustard for next time. Chalk lines you do not need, notes about maybe, solutions that became, no, you gently rub with a clean rag. The ghost remains like a memory, helpful later when a similar window confesses a similar vice. You sweep pin droppings with a magnet you've tied in a handkerchief, small ticking noises as metal finds its way home, and the broom merely approves. Some evenings the warden visits during pin hour, his torch at slit, face at civil. He watches your hands for a moment, then remembers he is not here to learn and clears his throat into duty. You hold up the panel like a bride holding a veil and invite him to perform the palm test. He does, solemn as if christening a ship, and then writes, satisfactory, in his book, a word that glows under the chalky shop light. You offer him a safety pin from the saucer. He declines with an expression that says regulations do not cover gratuities in the pin family. You tuck it back, relieved that bureaucracy has not begun borrowing. Light learns your habits and sulks less. Bays that once leaked opinion become taciturn. Skylights that practiced opera close their throats. Coal chute squares that flirted with alley cats learn decorum. You, chalky to the elbows and a constellation of pinheads glittering faintly under the half-lamps, look around the shop and feel the tempo settle. Pins outpaced haste. Chalk found the truth of edges. Patience, patient as bread, rose without being watched and made a quiet loaf of night. Historians still argue whether patience is a teachable wartime virtue or a temporary costume people wear until rationing takes a holiday. They point to queues and ledgers and polite hands knocking on doors. They'd point also to post-war crowds rushing toward neon and noise. Your answer lives in a saucer, tools put back the same way every time, because tomorrow exists. Half-Light convinces you of continuity, it says. Work as if the next person will thank you. And your fingers obey. Before you shut the shop, you perform your own small inspection. Every pin accounted for, none in the floorboards to surprise a heel. Every chalk stub wrapped in paper so it will not misbehave in the drawer. Every panel tagged with its family name and first instruction, left first then right, because tired minds prefer uppercase. The saucer of pins goes into the jam jar. The jam jar goes into the tin. The tin goes into the drawer with a thump that sounds like a stanza ending. Light joke 3. You tell the drawer you'll publish its poetry when the war is over. It answers with a creak that might be a rhyme. You step outside to lock up and the street returns your mood. Lamps hooded, windows attentive, air cool and mildly authoritative. The curb you painted last week gleams a modest white. Notion will learn a lesson tonight. Somewhere, a siren decides not to practice. You breathe and think of the half-light inside. The chalk's soft geometry, the patient pins, the seam that took exactly as long as breath allowed. And you feel, ridiculously and correctly, that you have sewn a small piece of quiet onto the night. Back home, your own curtains wait with the expectant look of pupils before roll call. You find the safety pin you left last week at the hem when the cat tried to become an understudy, remove it, and store it on the bedside saucer. Chalk dust on your fingers, you draw the drapes and watch the room change key, from daylight's brisk C to night's forgiving F. You lie down and decide patience is a lullaby one person sings with their hands. The street hums along. The pins, all present and accounted for, sleep like silver commas waiting for tomorrow's sentences. You know the knock now, not a fist, not a scold, just two knuckles with a little wrist in it, as if tapping dust from a book edge. The warden's silhouette keeps its hat politely on the far side of your frosted pane, and you answer with the door on its chain and a voice that does not go to the bother of surprise. He says, "Evening," and you say, "Likewise," and between the two words is a whole treaty about how to run a city without starting a row. You invite him in with your hand and keep the shop's lamps lowered to their best manners. The machine on the table has the look of a dog that promises to be good if no one mentions rabbits. Inspections, when they go right, feel like tailoring for a customer who understands buttons. Clip the torch to its slit, light disciplined into a ribbon narrow enough to be a bookmark. Raise the palm toward a seam, no halo. Test the bay returns, no gossip at the edges. Try the door skirt, no treacherous glimmer at the sill. He writes with a pencil that has more regulations than lead, and you hold the curtain's hem the way a midwife holds a newborn ankle, gentle, assured, prepared to be firm if necessary. The book records. Satisfactory. The best word on any street that has learned to do difficult things quietly. Mainstream fact walks in with him and sits on the counter. Air raid precautions, ARP, wardens, civilians in steel helmets and sensible capes, were charged with enforcing blackout regulations from 1939 onward, authorized to knock, advise, and in persistent cases report householders. Fines could follow for showing a light, while wardens also kept incident logs, guided people to shelters, and coordinated first aid and fire watchers. You have watched them take notes in rain without growing unkind. You have also watched them drink tea with their notebooks closed and become human again. The good wardens, most are, use their torches like librarians point at maps. Here, a thin line. There, a corner with opinions. They do not stab the beam into faces. They do not mistake authority for volume. You meet them in the middle, speaking in the dialect of hinges and hems. This bay's right-hand cheek, you say, tugging a return into stricter behavior. That fanlight thinks it's stained glass, he answers, holding the slit light just so until the last faint thread of brightness confesses and is forgiven with a snap and a felt pad. On some evenings he brings you to a neighbor's who has reached the stage of despair where every pin looks like an accusation. You step in behind him as if you were the quiet second violin, and you do the palm test at the window while he does the voice test at the kitchen table. We'll sort it, in a tone that irons shirts by itself. When the blackout cloth finally sits like a proper verdict, he writes nothing triumphant. You say nothing smug. The family just stands in the new dark that is not frightening and breathes like people shaking hands with the same idea. Light joke 1. The first night he visited, you saluted before remembering you are a seamstress and not a regiment. He tried to bow without dropping his clipboard. The two of you looked like a small traveling pantomime of manners. Now you confine yourselves to nods, and the clipboard remains as dignified as a bishop. Not all knocks are gentle. Now and then a different warden, tired, wet, behind on rounds, arrives with a voice sharp enough to snip thread. You have a policy for those. Answer with civility so padded it can't find corners to bruise itself on. Demonstrate the fixings, invite the palm, repair the leak. If a lecture arrives, you let it pass through your shop like a draft, cooling no one. By the time the pencil comes out, the tone has improved, and the book makes that steadying sound pencils make when they behave. There's paperwork for darkness. You keep a little stack of certificates you made up yourself, really just tags that say left first then right, or button 2 then 4, because some minds relax when instructions show their faces. The warden approves. He's seen too many fine fittings ruined by the nightly rush to declare bedtime. He slides one of your tags into his notebook like a recipe he means to try. You pretend not to notice and feel unreasonably pleased. Historians still argue whether enforcement or education made the blackout work. Were people obedient because wardens could find them, or cooperative because wardens were neighbors with steady shoes? Whether fear of raids taught order, or order taught courage that survived the raids? You filed the debate under T. Some problems are solved by hot water and company. A stern knock can make compliance. A quiet demonstration can make competence. Your street has more competence every week. You learn the warden's rounds by the tempo of his boots. He prefers to sweep the east side first, catch the lamplight's bad habits while it still has a little swagger, then swing to the west as kitchens begin to remember they are not theaters. He pauses at your white-painted curb and nods. Shin saver, he once called it, with the prayerful gratitude of a man whose shins have known enthusiasm. And you keep the paint fresh because manners are cheaper than plasters. Sometimes he borrows your magnet in a handkerchief to fetch a pin that has jumped to freedom near the skirting. He returns it as if returning a borrowed dog, grateful, a little in love. Quirky tidbit has become an unofficial policy between you. He carries in his pocket a tiny roll of black paper strips, offcuts you gave him, and 2 felt squares with snap have sewn on. When he finds a leak too small for a lecture but too loud to ignore, he gives a strip and a square. Temporary until the seamstress calls, and marks his book with a dot that means kindness has been applied. Some nights he finishes with both squares still in his pocket, and waves them at you like a fisherman failing to boast. You wave back with a handful of hooks you suspect he will quietly redistribute. The fines, when they arrive, are as dull as adding sums. A stubborn window, a householder who refuses to learn, a repeated halo, paperwork follows. You dislike it the way a dressmaker dislikes ripping out a seam, necessary, unsatisfying. Mostly, advice suffices. You suspect that is because the knock is gentle, the torch modest, the pencil accurate. The city, like a nervous hem, responds to being handled rather than harangued. Light joke too. Once, on a very wet night, his cape tried to become part of your doorway. You unpick them, cape from hinge, like a quick alteration while he pretended not to be wearing a door. He promised to report the hinge for attempted conscription. You offered the hinge a buttonhole to keep its ambitions busy. Inspections make you tidy in new ways. You pin order cards to the backs of finished curtains so a relief warden won't have to guess which side is the temperamental one. You chalk tiny arrows where the palm should land during a household self-test. You keep a file, brown, honest, of addresses where geometry picks fights, so you can accompany the warden with the right pockets full. He, in return, brings you small intelligence. Number 14 /choose hems, bring felt. Baker's fanlight behaving, clips holding hands with patience. Between you, a week's worth of awkward windows becomes a ledger of solved problems and learned manners. Mainstream aside, tucked under the blotter, along with blackout enforcement, wardens took on stirrup pumps, sand bucket drills, incendiary spotting, and the unglamorous minutes after a blast, cordons, blankets, names. You have seen your warden pause mid-inspection and listen to a sky that isn't talking yet, then resume with a softer pencil. Your job is the edges of light. His is also the edges of fear. The gentleness of the knock is part of the plan. Sometimes he tests you with the official light card, a small white square held at arm's length outside. If any glow paints it, the window has opinions. You try not to take it personally. You adjust a return, lengthen a hook, add a stitch like a surgeon who owes bedside manner to the living. He lowers the card, nods, writes the word that helps a street sleep. You tuck the chalk away and feel, absurdly, that you passed an exam set by the moon. Light joke 3. He claims his notebook is graded by the ministry. A for absence of glow, B for barely, C for candleish, D for daylight. You tell him your ledgers are graded by the cat, A for acceptable, B for brushed against, C for claimed as bed, D for disaster. The cat saunters across the counter as if to initial both systems. When he leaves, the door's catch lifts and settles with a sound that has learned to mean held. You sweep up pins, label the day's parcels, and walk him to the threshold where the white curb waits like a quiet smile. He steps into the street and becomes a silhouette with a slit of light, the gentlest possible scythe for harvesting stubborn glows. You watch him knock next door, tap tap, and hear a child giggle at the ceremony of the palm. The city is being inspected, yes, but also rehearsed, taught its cues, reminded of its lines, promoted from chorus to company. Historians still argue whether blacked-out cities created a new kind of neighborliness or merely revealed one that had been hiding behind net curtains. Did the gentle knock break down shy doors, or did crisis open them? You prefer proofs and practicalities. Borrowed magnets returned, curb edges painted by hands that don't own the step, felt squares shared as if sweets. Inspection without bruised tempers turned out to be a craft, not a miracle. Before you close, you add a line to your own book. Warden gentle, windows good, cat insubordinate. You hang the magnet back on its nail, rinse the felt squares you'll replace tomorrow, and set 2 extra hooks in a paper envelope marked for a house where the latch has teeth. Outside, the street breathes its slow, obedient dark. Inside, your machine rests. The knock will come again, soft as always, and you will be ready with hems that prefer to pass and windows that have learned, under kindly instruction, How to stop glowing. Air has manners if you give it the furniture. You can't bully a room into silence and expect it to breathe. You have to set out little chairs for the breezes, a table for the draft to put its elbows on, and a polite corridor where fresh comes in, stale goes out, and none of it blabs to the street. Tonight your job is to tighten darkness while leaving the lungs unlocked. Vents, grills, keyhole whispers, the faint exhale from a coal fire that would like to keep its opinions. Each needs a costume that keeps it decent without suffocating the party. You begin with a house that takes its air seriously, high ceilings, a respectable fireplace, a transom that was born to flirt with the weather. The master of the place worries that the new curtains, splendid and obedient, have also turned the parlor into a jar. You nod because you've felt that whitened, flat taste of a sealed room, the way voices get polite to save oxygen. You open your kit like a picnic, felt, tape, tin snips, a roll of Blackout serge, 2 small frames you knock together from battens, and a clutch of oddments that would scandalize a lady's sewing basket, tin can lids, wire, shellac, chalk for diplomacy. The principle is simple and not at all simple. Make a maze the moon can't solve but air can. You sketch a path in your notebook, arrow in, arrow out, 2 right-angled turns for modesty, and then you build it in miniature. A vent baffle becomes a little hallway you fasten over the grill, block the straight-through light, leave a dogleg for the draft. For a transom above the door, you mount a secondary panel behind the glass with 2 felted cheeks. It stands off the pane just enough that air can slither, but light, line-of-sight creature that it is, stubs its toe and thinks better of traveling. Mainstream fact finds its way onto your work table like a handbook. Civil Defense Guidance in 1939-40 repeatedly warned householders. Do not seal rooms completely. Allow ventilation. Noting fireplace flues and window vents must remain sufficient for health, while still screened from showing light. Many pamphlets recommended louvre screens, baffles, or removable shades. Factories painted roof glass but kept ridge vents. Shelters had prescribed air changes per hour and crude deflectors to keep light in and breath out. Blackout, properly done, was a dimmer, not a stopper. Your baffles are obedience made portable. You cut felt into strips and ladder stitch them onto a wooden rectangle the size of a good book. Inside you fix a smaller rectangle, then another, each offset to force a shy turn. The result looks like a tiny labyrinth with a fondness for right angles. The householder peers in as if expecting a mouse. You hold the frame against the vent, seal its edges with wool tape that feels like a kind word, then stand back and perform the palm test. No glow comes through, but when you wet a fingertip and hold it near the grill, the skin hums cool. The room exhales. The fire, hearing the news, stops sulking and burns like a professional. Quirky tidbit. You carry a pair of old tea caddies in your kit. Their sliding lids, cut to size, make perfect adjustable shutters behind small grills. Slide left for more breath, slide right for behave. You also keep a shoehorn, because a shoehorn is a louvre if you squint. Bent gently and set on 2 pins, it becomes a little awning that tells light to mind its own business while letting air stroll underneath. No manual lists. Shoehorn repurposed. Yet the shoehorn earns its keep more often than some of your officious tools. Rooms have personalities about steam. Kitchens sweat from the eyebrows. Bedrooms aspire to crisp sheets and get dew instead. Sculleries fog up like polite clouds. Your felt baffles are one answer, but condensation likes a second opinion. You stitch narrow flues, tubes of Blackout serge with a wire ring at each end, that plug into the top corners of window frames and curve inward like the throat of a chimney. Warm, damp air wanders up, finds the flue, and discovers an uncomplicated exit that doesn't gossip to the street. You tack a little flap at the inside end to catch the odd beat of rain. Because nothing ruins diplomacy like a drip on a carpet. You're careful with fires. A badly hung curtain has ambitions toward combustion, and fireplaces enjoy encouraging ambitions. So you make hearth aprons, blackout skirts that button onto brackets a safe distance from the grate, hem-weighted, sides belted back like a well-bred coat. The apron keeps the room from shining while leaving the fire all the oxygen it requires to avoid sulking into smoke. You test with eyes and nose, flames clean and blue at the base, no sighing as if the grate were climbing a hill. The house nods, and so do the cat and the kettle. Historians still argue whether the Blackout's war on light caused a quiet skirmish with lungs. Did the extra damp and sealed windows swell tuberculosis and bronchitis statistics? Or were those curves already bending under winter cold and close quarters? Whether fogs that learned to live indoors were Blackout's fault or London's long habit of flirting with smoke? Papers from the time disagree in elegant prose. You choose to believe what your fingertips and nose insist. Stale is a solvable problem if you give air a polite lane and cloth a mission besides. Stop. Light joke 1. Your first attempt at a window flue looked like a giant black sock. The family called it Uncle's stocking, until you introduced snaps and a wire ring that improved its morals. Now they call it the breather, and you pretend it's a compliment rather than a suggestion you've married into the ventilation family. On a back-to-back terrace. Bedroom windows sit too close to other people's bedtime. You fit little batten frames across the lower sash, each carrying a set of slanted slats faced in felt. The slats aim down toward the room. Air rises and leaves through the tiny zigzag like a letter traveling a private post. Light, trying to enter, hits plush and sulks. For summer, you sew a second set faced with cheesecloth instead of felt, so the room can breathe more boldly while blackout hours shorten. You label the frames, winter sleep, and summer nap, with a pencil that makes everything sound friendly. Some houses have vents so pretty they argue for their own survival. Cast iron grills with acanthus leaves, fan-shaped cutouts that whisper of a Victorian fondness for flourish. You tack thin blackout silk behind them, doubled and stitched with tiny tucks so the fabric gathers like a ruffle and breaks light into private griefs. The warden's torch sees nothing but good behavior. The grill keeps its curls. The house keeps its taste. Mainstream aside, folded neatly into your pocket, gas and paraffin heaters were common, and pamphlets warned, no uncertain words, against shutting off their air. Suffocation is silent, one poster said, adding, a little draft, wisely screened, saves lives. You've read the lines so often the cadence lives in your thumb. Every baffle you make has an escape clause on its edge, a finger-width slot you can open one notch further without dismantling the world. You invent a test you call the mirror cloud. Hold a small looking glass near the suspected stale corner. Count your breath's fog. Watch how fast it clears. In a lively room, 3. In a sulker, 6 or 7 lazy heartbeats. After a baffle, it returns to 3. You add the numbers to the ledger like a scientist who refuses to wear a white coat and prefers an apron with a respectable number of pockets. Light joke 2. You tell the mirror it's now a meteorologist. It tries to look important and fogs on cue. Factories are an education in scale. A munitions shed with roof vents painted dull needs darkness without heat stroke. You walk catwalks and peer at sawtooth lights, then suggest baffles that hang like black combs, teeth down, sky fooled. The foreman laughs at a seamstress telling iron what to do until your paper model persuades his sense of air. After the fitters copy your combs in tin and angle them just so, the shed stops glowing and men stop fainting. You sign nothing. You leave a few felt strips with a note. For the fussiest corners. And go back to a coal-chute window that has learned to gossip again. Quirky tidbit 2. In your pocket rides a roll of black sticking plaster. It is officially for fingers, but unofficially for keyholes. A neat cross over the escutcheon and then a leather tongue you cut from an old glove slips under the latch plate. Key in, tongue flips, key out, tongue covers the gossip. You call it the door's eyelid. The households call it civilized. The warden, doing his rounds, pauses at your latest parlor and performs the soundless ceremony. Slit torch, palm up, patience. Nothing shines where it shouldn't. He steps nearer the hearth and sniffs like a man checking bread. The air smells of coal, yes, but not of complaint. Good, he says with the brevity of someone who knows too many words can use up a room. He scribbles and leaves you with a look that reads, "You've taught this house sense." You accept the compliment on behalf of Felt. Historians still argue whether the real genius of the home front lived in ministries or in rooms, in policy, or in people who built small baffles, hemmed long skirts for doors, stuck leather over keyholes, and taught windows to sleep without stopping lungs. The papers award credit to acronyms. Your ledger, smudged with chalk and tea, awards it to fabric and patience. Both can be true, both probably are. What matters tonight is that the mirror clears in 3 and the child in the next room coughs less. Light joke 3, you cut a prototype, breather, so handsome you affix a tiny bow to its inside end. The family insists the bow faces the room. No one wants a well-dressed flu showing off to the alley cats. You concede to fashion. The flu, flattered, behaves. Before you go, you leave a card on the mantel. To air, lift flap at top right, 2 finger widths. Teal close, press snaps, left then right. You write it in black on brown so it won't glow even if curiosity holds it near a lamp. You show the family the palm test at the vent. Feel that cool? Good, and the mirror cloud. Fog, 1 2 3, clear. They smile like people who have been issued a tool rather than a rule. Back in the shop, you hang the day's baffle pattern on a nail and label it. Parlor, dogleg, generous. The room smells faintly of felt and tin, beeswax and iron. You brew tea in the dye captain and the kettle forgives you. Outside, the wind tests the street and finds no gossiping windows, no doors with loose tongues. Inside, your flues and mazes let just enough world pass through to keep breath kind and sleep honest. You draw your own curtains, listen for that quick soft change in oxygen when a room settles, and feel it arrive, either stifled nor chatty. Darkness has tightened its belt. The house can still sigh. You lie down in the night, grateful, smooths your hair the way a draft does when it remembers it's a guest. Your hands smell of felt and soap. Your lungs measure to 3 and say, "Good." Somewhere, a vent you dressed is being admired by a cat. Somewhere else, a warden's torch passes a grill you taught to keep its counsel. The city breathes, privately, correctly, and you give the darkness its last stitch with your eyes. Night is the right color for persuasion. Dusk slips into the shop like a supervisor with good bedside manner, and you lay out the evening's chemistry on the back table with the solemnity of an altar. Enamel pan, the dye captain teapot steaming faintly with pride, muslin bags that look like they once cuddled oranges and are now on secret service, a wooden spoon assigned to shadows, and 3 jam jars labeled with a librarian's neatness, T.A. soot beat. Outside, the street is already practicing its quiet. Inside, you prepare to convince cheerful prints to lower their voices. You begin with tea because tea understands the British soul and therefore understands cloth. A strong brew, household strong, not guest strong, goes into the pan. 6 handfuls of leaf from the sweepings tin the grocer keeps for people who think dyeing is a moral duty. Water rolls to the barest simmer, never a boil. Boiled cloth shrinks, and you've already fought your yards to length once this week. Muslin bags of leaf bob like miniature life belts. You slide lengths of chintz under the surface and prod them just enough to admit that change is possible. 10 minutes makes, late summer. 30 makes, November afternoon. An hour makes, respectable blackout. You fish a test strip, rinse, peg it, and watch steam carry away the color's nerves. Mainstream fact sets a sturdy mug on the worktop. With true black dyes scarce and rationed, households turn to vegetable dyes and kitchen chemistry. Tea, coffee, walnut hulls, soot, logwood where it could be had, and proprietary packets when coupons allowed. The ministries. Make do and mend. Leaflets nodded toward redyeing as a way to dignify old garments and repurpose prints. Blackout pamphlets did not demand black, only no visible light, so tea brown, submuted, and navy leaning became useful adjectives. You add one more. Apologetic. Soot is honest if you treat it as a colleague rather than a scandal. You don't dump ash into water like a melodrama. You whisk lampblack, collar scraped from the stove pipe, char brushed from the hearth brick, into a paste with a whisper of soap, then thin it with hot water until it looks like ink that's lost its taking notes privileges. A dash of vinegar keeps the mixture from sulking off the fibers. You stroke it onto cloth with the back of the spoon, rinse in warm water that has opinions about honesty, then fix with a pinch of salt like a cook who trusts her hand more than measures. Held to the lamp, roses lower their eyes, checks stop being noisy. Beetwater is a poet. Slice beets thin, simmer until the kitchen smells like a polite root cellar, and you have a dye that turns cocky pink into a sulky mauve. Pleased to mind blackout hours. It fades if scolded, so you had a fix, alum where coupons and chemists cooperate, or a folk remedy, strong salt, a murmur of vinegar. You learn quickly that beetwater and tea are allies. Together they take the sugar from flowers that seem to have been raised on compliments, and make them prefer library voices. Light joke 1. You warn a bolt of poppies that they are about to become serious botanists. The cloth replies by bleeding one heroic red tear into the pan and then settling down to study. You keep sample books like a pharmacist, swatches stapled to paper with their recipes in small script. 3 tea bags, 8 minutes, rinse, salt dip. Result: wet newspaper. Lampblack paste plus soap, dabbed in circles, rinse. Result: behaved coal. B plus tea, 2010, alum if smug. Result: church cushion dot. The book smells faintly of tannin and victory. Customers bring scraps to audition. You tape them on, write their names. Mrs. L. The fishmonger's half curtain, a schoolroom map that has ambitions to become a blind, and plan the evening as if hosting a very sober party. Quirky tidbit: you borrowed a mangle for squeezing dye evenly through yard goods, and the mangle, which used to earn its keep flattening sheets into something like etiquette, finds in dye work a second career. You feed a length of tea damp cloth between the rollers while turning the handle at the speed of common sense. The trickle from the trough runs the shade of old novel, and the evenness pleases the part of your soul that likes receipts aligned. The mangle, nicknamed Sir Squeeze, claims no opinion but gleams modestly when oiled. Light is a negotiator, so you test dyes under the lamp as they dry. Things look one way wet, another dry, and a third when a warden's slit torch narrows its gaze. You learn to be suspicious of triumph during rinsing and to trust only the palm test against the pane, cloth pressed to glass, lamp behind your hand. If your fingers glow like gossip, back to the pot. If your fingers vanish, the dye has earned its keep. You make yourself a little card with squares of each shade and, next to each, a scribble. Pass at 8 p.m. in rain, pass except snow, pass if neighbor turns off kitchen drama. Historians still argue whether these domestic dye pots had measurable impact on aerial navigation. Did brown florals really spare a street from being mapped by a passing eye, or whether the true service was psychological? Prints sobered, rooms calmed. People felt they were participating in the city's new etiquette. They also debate whether the turn to muted colors helped acclimate taste to the post-war utility aesthetic, or whether the instant tints of real paint returned. Homes sprinted back to sunshine. You stir the pot and file the argument under plausible. A word dies a door. Not every cloth takes correction. Rayon pouts, sulks under tea, and repays soot with streaks. Polished cotton tries to behave, and then throws a tantrum at the rinse. You learn a voice for saying no that doesn't bruise. Line it, double it, save it for quilts when the all clear becomes forever. The die captain teapot, meanwhile, proves her mettle. Tea for die, tea for you, tea for a customer who needs the comfort of watching a thing darken into usefulness. Light joke 2, you assure the teapot she'll get a medal. She answers by whistling at a pitch only kettles can hear. Ventilation matters. You crack the back door and hum to the little flue you fitted last week. The room exhales like a person who's decided not to argue anymore. You keep windows shaded while cloth hangs to drip. No sense in winning light in one direction and losing it in another. And you lay old newspapers under pegs that articulate like patient knuckles. Your apron goes home striped with tea and soot. You call it your Blackout tartan and consider marketing it when peace has leisure for jokes. Mainstream aside, useful and plain. Commercial packets. Dylan, before the brand became famous, existed but were scarce and not always dark enough. Walnut hulls made a trusty brown. Logwood, if anyone's uncle in the dye trade could manage a whisper of it, deep in navies. Bluing could push a depressed brown toward night and make doesn't show light out of unhappy sky. You keep an envelope of bluing flakes like contraband optimism and deploy a pinch when beet water looks like it has second thoughts. You invent a soot trap because you are tired of ash on your floorboards. A cloth cone tied inside the chimney pot for an hour yields a respectable harvest of lampblack without making your stove sulk. You whisk the black into a paste with a dab of laundry soap and store it in a stone jar that used to love marmalade. Label: lamp-like. The first evening you tried it, the cat left paw prints of excellent density across a strip of calico and onto your sleeve. You kept the strip as a cautionary tale, and the sleeve as a uniform. Light joke 3, you suggest to the cat that it open an atelier. It offers you a bill for consulting services, payable in sardines. Clients arrive after hours to drop small calamities at your altar. A nursery curtain with rabbits that refuse to grow up. A parlor runner in spring shout that makes the transom glow impertinently. You perform triage. Tea first, soot second, beat as understudy. You pin recipe cards to each item like hospital tags. The rabbits become evening hares. The runner learns. Late afternoon. The transom relaxes its shoulders. When the warden calls later, he sees nothing but a polite absence where an argument used to be. You keep time by drip and stain. 10 pegs, 10 cloths, an alphabet of quiet darks spelling out a new grammar. Not black, but behaved. The shop smells like tannin and slightly scorched patience. You write formulas in your ledger the way a cook writes what made guests ask for seconds. 2 spoons bluing tipped into tea, rain approaching. Soot paste brushed on, cross-grained strokes, coal in a good mood. Beet water on pink roses, reformed chorus girl. Historians still argue whether this everyday chemistry belongs in the footnotes, or the headlines of homefront history, whether the patient evenings over enamel pans count as war work, or keeping house. You've come to think there's no difference when the result is a city that doesn't spill its light. Dye pots after dusk made the map dull to enemy eyes and warm to a warden's. That is enough nobility for any PA and .by midnight. The clothesline behind the shop looks like a gallery of sighs. You bring the panels in before Dew can invent opinions, press them with an iron that thinks it's a judge, and lay them smooth on the table to cool. In the lamplight they are not gloomy, they are rested. You roll them, tie with strings so they don't forget they're civilized, and write their new names on brown tags. Parlor, tea dark, nursery, hair, transom, soot polite. Tomorrow they will hang and the windows will forget how to show off. You wash the spoon, rinse the pan, empty the dye captain's belly with a ceremony she thinks is too abrupt, and open the door to the night. The street gives you a cool breath for the price of standing still. Somewhere, a curtain you sobered is learning to make a room hushed. Somewhere else, a woman is holding her palm to glass and smiling because her fingers do not glow. You lock up and carry home the faintest smell of tannin on your cuff like a badge only you recognize. At home, you add a line to the small notebook that lives by your kettle. Tea 40 minutes cures roses. Soot, brush, not soak. Beat, kind to theatricals. You turn your own lamps low, draw the dyed curtains you made last month, and watch the room slip gently into its evening suit. The city outside practices being a rumor. Your hands, stained in honest ways, feel bigger than their size. You lie down, and the night, properly dark and properly ventilated, settles like a well-dyed cloth. No streaks, no shine, only rest. Old curtains have stories stitched into them like margins. Your job is to keep the story and change the ending. Parlor lace that once practiced flirtation now needs to learn monastic vows. Brocade with a memory of Christmas wants to stop advertising itself to the street. Damask that has met 3 generations of sunshine must discover the dignity of shade. You spread them on the table as if tucking them in, palm open, listening for where the fabric says help and where it says, I can still be useful if you stop scolding. Mending begins with politeness. You do not tug at a frayed selvage as if reprimanding a child in public. You slide a card under the tear to lift it from the table and read the weave. Twill accepts discipline differently from plain weave. Satin weaves hold grudges. For holes, you choose a patch like a witness. Same grain, similar weight, not too proud. You cut the patch on the true, or on the bias if the wound lies near a curve, then feather its edges with a thumbnail until it agrees to come quietly. A paper template helps. You couch the edges down with herringbones so tiny it feels like thinking rather than sewing. You keep the thread a shade towards dusk, because night forgives, but it admires effort. Lace is the opposite of blackout, and therefore the most interesting pupil. You do not scold it for being itself. You make it a chaperone. First, you tea-dye it down from trumpet solo white to church whisper, coaxing the glare out. Then you lay it over a new inner panel, calico, utility twill, even an old sheet that learned modesty in a past life, treating the lace as top cloth, the lining as work. The seam sits between them, a quiet handshake. The result is both memory and law. Daylight sees grandma's curtains, night sees obedience. You tack the lace with tiny seed stitches that catch motifs at their densest. Flowers, nets, the little bridges called brides. So the thread travels invisibly and pride remains uninjured. Mainstream fact lays a pamphlet on the table and taps the margin. Make do and mend. Issued by the Ministry of Information in 1943, cheerfully instructed households to turn older furnishings, curtains, sheets, tablecloths, into new garments and vice versa. Its drawings show turning worn sheets sides to middle, piecing and unpicking for yardage. The advice wandered happily into window work. Use old drapes for linings, turn faded panels, dye prints, piece offcuts for transoms. You treat the booklet like a distant aunt, well-meaning, sometimes too perky, often right. You keep a darning mushroom near the pins because worn hems behave like socks. You slide the hem over the mushroom, smile at the absurdity, and Swiss darn along the fold where the rod has bruised the cloth for years. Warp and weft are reintroduced like long-lost cousins at a polite tea. Thread crosses where threads used to live, and the edge regains the will to hang without whispering gossip to the floor. For pulled threads across damask, you employ a needle with the diplomacy of a curate. Tease the float back into line, steam, press under brown paper, and let the pattern remember itself with relief. Quirky tidbit, you stiffen certain mends with per man's interfacing. A paste of flour and water brushed onto a thin calico square, dried, then ironed flat between brown paper. It makes a crisp little bandage that behaves until the first wash, which is fine because blackout linings prefer to be dusted and aired, not drowned. For fussy tears near eyelets, You raid the button tin for tiny bone rings and work a neat overcast round them. The ring takes the strain. The mend keeps its freight check does not exist, but soap does. You rub a dry sliver along a cut edge you'll bind later, and the threads settle like a choir hearing the organ begin. Where soap offends, you employ a whisper of beeswax, always with a pressing cloth. Wax loves to behave like gossip if allowed near hot irons. You keep a dedicated tea towel, now more wax than towel, and your iron knows to mind its manners when it smells summer. Sometimes mending means telling a relic it can stop pretending to be a curtain. A velvet that thins at the fold becomes a pelmet faced in stout twill. A parlor panel becomes the front of a door skirt. A lace valance learns to live as a top layer over a blackout blind, purely as a kindness to memory. You label the parcels to spare feelings. Panel 2 pelmet, honorable retirement. And the house agrees by looking relieved under the new job titles. Light joke 1. You inform the lace it has been promoted to decoration emeritus. It immediately insists on a seat near the fireplace. Torn edges along rods are common as rain. You unpick the tired header, press it flat, and add a strip of sturdy tape. Linen if the coupons smile, twill if not, then reform the pocket with a seam you could balance a ruler on. Hooks return to evenly spaced positions, which they find both flattering and restful. If a rod chews, you tack felt in a narrow sleeve along the pocket. The felt becomes an umpire, and rods respect umpires even when they don't admit it. Historians still argue whether wartime thrift birthed a lasting culture of repair or merely held the place in the queue until peacetime abundance swept back in. Did visible mending become an aesthetic, a badge of honor, or was it hidden at the first chance under ready-made? Some say the utility years taught a new respect for function that never wholly left. Others point to shop windows blooming with frill-the-minute coupons went quiet. You thread a needle and decide you can see both futures in one hem. The invisible mend for pride, the neat patch for memory. Apprentices learn. Quiet stitches. You show them ladder stitch that closes like lips after a secret. Herringbones so fine it looks like breaths. Overcast that seats itself into the cloth like a well-brought-up guest finding the edge of a chair. You forbid tugging. You praise unpicking, the mark of seriousness, not failure. You keep a sand glass turned to 10 minutes on the table to remind hurried hands that patience is the cheapest ingredient. Like joke 2, you threaten to fine a careless not one currant from the ration bun. Apprentices immediately sew more carefully than saints. Mending is also cleaning, gently. You vacuum lace through a net so the nozzle won't elope with a motif. You sponge soot from hems with benzene when the chemist can be persuaded, or with bread when he can't, soft crumb rolled into gray pearls that take away the years without announcing themselves. Tea stains from earlier experiments are forgiven with patience, and a saucer of cold water under the spot while you coax the brown upward with a cotton bud. You keep a tray labeled surgery, which is just a baking sheet with folded towels. The tray keeps floods in check and dignity intact. Not every household wants to see them end. Some do. In one nursery, you applique felt moons over old lace holes, a constellation that perfectly hides disobedience while pleasing an inspector of 4 years. In a sitting room, you work a visible darn in crimson over a brown patch as a private joke. Scar, but brave. And the owner taps it with a finger each night as if reading the weather. Where pride wants invisibility, you oblige. Where memory wants a flag, you raise it small and neat. Mainstream aside, equal parts tender and utilitarian. Local salvage drives collected, household rags, for paper and waste textiles, for reprocessing. Many a frayed curtain ended as flock for padding or fiber for shoddy. You keep a sack under the table marked beyond hope, and even that sack feels like work rather than defeat. When it's full, you carry it to the depot and exchange its weight for 2 lengths of binding and, if the clerk is feeling revolutionary, a spare packet of needles. Quirky tidbit number 2. Horsehair makes a marvelous stay. You pull a few long hairs from an elderly brush, knot them into a filigree cord, and couch it along a drooping scallop. It holds the curve like a line drawn in firm pencil but looks like air. You try not to grow smug and fail. The scallop, flattered, behaves. Late, a customer arrives with a pair of curtains that smell of coal fires and holidays. Damask, red once, now. Recollection. The sun has eaten a ladder into one panel. You piece from the turnings, hidden spare at the side hem, the exact pattern repeat, match the weft like a locksmith, and plant the patch under the damage with stitches invisible as patience. Pressed, the latter becomes a rumor. The customer puts a hand to her mouth and says nothing for a full half-minute. The silence lands like a medal on the table. Light joke 3. You award your thimble a promotion. It asks for a tea break. The warden's slit torch inspects with more courtesy than usual when you call him to see the finished work. He raises his palm and you lift the mended panel to the window. No glow at him, none at the patched ladder, none through the lace that now rides over a sober lining. He writes, "Creditable," then looks up and adds, with reckless extravagance, "Very." The word hangs in the air like steam from a good kettle. You pretend your eyes are dusty. The cat, bored by excellence, yawns. You log the evening with more care than most. Lace to lining, seed stitches at brides, damask ladder, repeat patched from turnings, header rebuilt, linen tape, hem Swiss darn at fold. If tomorrow brings a bomb that tears the street, you want someone to find the book and know that before terror, hands were busy with civilization. When you finally draw your own mended curtains, the room feels older and better for it, like a face that has learned to keep its own counsel. Threads you laid down hours ago listen to the window and decide, magnanimously, to lie still. You sit, thimble off, and watch the last seam in your hands relax into the cloth's memory. The city outside does not shine, therefore, someone else can sleep. You extinguish the lamp the way you finish a stitch, firm, small, with the tail tucked under, and go to bed confident that tomorrow you can teach another old curtain the trick of dignified night. The table arrives by consent, which is better than furniture. It's really 3 smaller tables with opinions, pushed together until their edges sign a treaty and stop wobbling. A borrowed oilcloth spreads across the treaty like a flag. The pattern, cheerful lemons dreaming of daylight, now serves a darker cause. You bring pins and chalk. Mrs. Patel brings binding and cardamom biscuits that make order feel perfumed. The baker's wife brings a box of clips and, heroically, the loan of her better scissors. Mr. Hughes contributes a chair that sighs like a tenor at rehearsal and sits down to be useful. Soon the tenement has a workroom, and the workroom has a pulse. You anchor the evening with a list that sounds like a lullaby. Side returns for the 3rd floor bay. 2 door skirts for the back stairs where drafts gossip. Felt moons to put the nursery stars to bed. A coal chute square for the basement that keeps telling secrets to the alley. Needles thread themselves with a willingness that would impress a minister. Thread passes hand to hand, brown card coupons set like coasters so no one forgets the arithmetic. And the table begins its gentle clock, snip, slide, pin, tuck, until news becomes labor and labor becomes whisper. There are rules and they're the sort that make neighbors like each other more. No one bleeds on the cloth. If a finger conspires, you pinch it over the sink like a conspirator and offer it a clean rag with a look that says, "Learn." No one sneers at old prints getting dyed. Forgiveness is as rationed as sugar but more potent. No one stitches while cross. Stitches remember moods. You are the forewoman only in the tenderest sense. You send patterns round the board, adjust hems that look tempted by dramatics, and translate a warden's "please" into polite compulsion. Advice in this room is softly bossy. Try a longer stitch there, dear. Let the cloth decide that corner. Ease, not tug. Yes, that's the breath. Mainstream fact pulls up a chair and opens its sensible notebook. Sewing circles and neighbor clubs sprang up in wartime Britain for everything from make do and mend, lessons to salvage and knitting. Women's voluntary service and local ARP posts hosted mending rooms, while tenements and terraces organized their own evenings to share tools, coupons, and know-how. Pamphlets traveled faster when read aloud with biscuits. In your building, the pamphlet has become a person in a cardigan who says, "We'll get on, shall we?" You run a silent demo. You pin an inside corner on the oilcloth while everyone leans in, the better to store the geometry behind their eyes. 2 pins at the stress points, 1 kissing the fold, a chalked whisper that means, "Clip me after stitching." Hands imitate. Mistakes get unpicked like gossip that won't help the street. Light joke 1, you threaten to issue demerits for seemly conduct. The table groans, and you ban puns for 10 minutes as punishment for everyone. Children flutter at the edges, deputized as runners. 1 tote labeled hooks does a polite circuit of the room. Another labeled felt moons lands near the nursery mother like a little crescent delivery. You measure a boy's arm span. "You are now a yard, don't let it go to your head." And he walks cloth from chair to chair as if parading a standard. The missus from the top floor remembers how her mother basted hems in a yard-long rhythm and teaches it to the girl beside her. The girl giggles, then stitches as if her laughter were a thimble. There is a small economy of exchange. The baker's wife earns extra clips by offering the better scissors for the hours in which hems become law. You keep a ledger with a courtesy you learned from haberdashers, binding out 6 yards, Mrs. P, clips IN, 12, baker, thread, 1 reel, number 14 returned. It reads like a poem of obedience. Coins appear, yes, but other currencies matter more. A tin of tea leaves, a slice of something wishfully called cake, a promise to mind a pram while stitches become straight. You invent a contraption from a broom handle, 2 bricks, and a length of twine, the communal hem bar. Cloth pins along the rod, knees steady the bricks, and 4 hands can fold, finger press, and pin a straight line no quarrel can bend. Mr. Hughes christens it, the magistrate, because it keeps everyone honest. Quirky tidbit, a violin mute, repurposed as a cord clip, proves excellent at taming an unruly lead for the iron. The mute, pleased to be useful without noise, grips the cord like a childhood friend. The warden makes a ceremonial appearance, cap doffed, torch slit, clipboard softened. He does the palm test at the parlor bay while the bay's owner tries not to look as if he's watching an exam. No glow. He inspects the stairs door skirt, which rolls into place with the dignity of a dowager. No treacherous glimmer. He sniffs the draft by the coal chute and finds, to his satisfaction, only the coal's respectable breath. Satisfactory. He writes, then adds a second word, commendable, so daring it nearly rattles the page. The table pretends not to preen. Light joke 2, you ask if commendable counts for extra coupons. He replies it pays in fewer knocks. Conversation is the mortar. It keeps the room together without hardening. Someone tells of extinguishers that behave like untrained dogs. You answer with your felt baffles and shoehorn louvres, and soon there's a plan to fit the bad-tempered vent on the landing. Someone else reports that beet water turned their roses into a color called, "Oh dear." You prescribe bluing flake homeopathy and promise to stop by with the dye captain and advice. Everyone nods. The list travels round the table. The evening becomes a ledger of solvable mischiefs. Historians still argue whether such rooms did more for morale than for measurable safety. Was the point those extra millimeters of overlap, or the muscles of cooperation they trained? Whether tenements that learned to share needles also learned to share fire watch shifts, shelter benches, and the gentler obligations of post-war life? They say mutual aid and social capital, with graduate voices. You say, pass the chalk, and watch a pair of hands become certain. Between tasks, you teach a tiny class called Corners That Don't Sulk. Chalk a right angle on the oilcloth, clip to the chalk, kiss, fold, pin, breathe. The table imitates like a choir that suddenly knows its part. You add door lungs, roll draft excluders, to the syllabus. The baker stuffs one with barley chaff no loaf will miss and pronounces it superior to old stockings. No one disagrees, partly because it's true, partly because chaff makes a tidy sound like useful rain. Light joke 3. You declare whoever drops a pin owes a current. By end of evening the current bowl is respectably full of imaginary fines, and everyone's floorboards are safer than arguments. You secretly pocket 2 currents back into the bowl because fairness is aesthetic as well as policy. Food arrives as punctuation, not plot. The cardamom biscuits dignify the hem bar's better efforts. A pot of canteen strong tea keeps advice fluent. Someone produces jam, wars thin him to summer. A child licks a spoon with sectarian devotion. You wipe hands, return to pins. Advice travels softer after jam. Every seam improves after the second cup. Mainstream aside, properly practical. Communal mending rooms sometimes posted. Rules of the bench. No hoarding, return needles, share patterns, no politics. Yours are simpler and somehow cover more. Be kind to cloth, kinder to fingers, don't wake the baby. Pass the good scissors as if they were holy. You add one privately. Don't let anyone go home feeling stupid. You keep it by making trouble into lessons and lessons into jokes with soft edges that a small crisis visits in the shape of a window that won't stop glowing at the sill. The table stops. The advice focuses. You do the crawl sanctioned by dignity. Face to floor, eye to line, then discover the floor out of truth by half an inch. The solution is a hem that learns to be 2 things, deep in the middle, shallower at the ends, an elegant trapeze disguised as courtesy. You chalk the difference, pin to the hum in your throat that says, "This is straight enough for the warden and better than straight for the room." And the glow dies. The table exhales as one creature. Quirky tidbit 2, you keep a compliments book on the mantel, really off-cut pages sewn with string. When a neighbor says, "That fits like good manners," or the warden risks, "Very," someone writes it down. Later, on short days, you read the book aloud and discover that praise, ration like everything else, feeds everyone twice. .by10. The work table's geography is tidy chaos. Piles labeled in pencil, upstairs bay, backstairs, nursery moons, make sense to anyone who has watched the evening grow. Clips sit in a saucer like obedient beetles. The better scissors rest in their sheath, sainted and unsullied. You tie brown tags as if presenting medals, left first, then right, button 2, then 4, vent, open one finger at top right. The handwriting is yours, but the voice is the room's, soft command, friendly authority. The cat, who has appointed herself inspector of comfort, tests the newly rolled door snake and approves by falling asleep across it at an angle engineers would admire. The baker reclaims his clips short by 1. You find the fugitive clip to the hem of your apron where it rode like a stowaway. Laughter travels once round, as modest as a hymn. The warden pops his head back in as if to collect the echo of his earlier compliment. He doesn't need to test again. He smells competence and tea. He leaves with a nod that contains a paragraph, and the paragraph says, "Fewer knocks tonight. Less worry equals fewer arguments. The street will breathe more like a household than a crowd." Historians still argue whether these tables were proto-parliaments, or just good neighbors ambling in the same direction. Whether the skill stuck or the friendliness did. Whether the post-war estate kitchens where prams parked and kettles sang were descendants of evenings like this. Your answer is a slow fold, measure, pin, press, pass. The muscle remembers. The city keeps that memory under its coat even when shop windows reclaim their glitter. You close by counting pins like blessings. Needles back in felt leaves, thread in tins, patterns stacked under the oilcloth for tomorrow. The work table disassembles into its 3 original participants, each returning to its usual corner with more self-respect for having been part of something larger. You wipe a chalk blur that looks suspiciously like a map of the building and leave, deliberately, one felt moon on the mantel for the child who stayed awake longer than is wise.I in the hall. You and your neighbors conduct a small pageant of carrying, door snake to the back stairs, parcel of returns to the 3rd floor, a bundle of moons to a nursery that will sleep better. The stairwell smells of tea, iron, and cheerful fatigue. Outside, the blackout is doing its job without shouting. Inside, the tenement has made itself useful to itself, which is a kind of victory the papers rarely print and the lungs always notice. At home, you add a line to the ledger. Shared table, 12 hands, 6 windows, 1 argument, resolved by biscuits. You set your own better scissors in their nest, lay your palm to the glass, and feel only cool. The room goes quieter the way a throat does before a good night's song. You lie down with the contentment of a seam pressed flat under brown paper. Heat, weight, time, and the city around you sleeps under a quilt it has stitched for itself. You tiptoe because tiptoeing edits light. The nursery has its own weather, warm milk, pencil shavings, a confetti of lint the sun usually catches at nap and which now must remain unobserved. Stars on walls, painted in a brave spring, glow just enough to insult the warden. You promised their artists you wouldn't shame them, only invite them to bed earlier. Out comes your satchel like a magician's pocket. Felt moons and clouds, tiny snaps, a reel of soft tape, 2 spring rods skinny as good habits, and a notebook where you've drawn bedtime as a flowchart. First you read the room like a storybook. Cot here, chair there, the patch of rug the child calls. The island. The window repeats its confession from the parlor, but softer, a sliver at the sill, a flirt at the latch, the whisper of a transom that refuses to learn indoor voice. Your hand does its palm test against the pane. Your other hand finds the precise place on the rod where a curtain likes a little extra weight so it doesn't kick when breezes practice mischief. You murmur to the cloth like you're reciting the alphabet. Cloth calms under murmurs. The stars are beautiful and, at 10 in the evening, criminals. You don't paint over them, you give them pajamas. Felt shapes, clouds the shape of bread, moons the shape of bitten biscuits, live in a small basket and fasten with snaps you dyed shy. Each star receives a cloud, each moon receives a moon. The child, deputized as Sky Warden, presses the snaps with ceremonious thumbs and assures you that the constellations will behave. You write, constellations now wearing coats, in the notebook because sometimes your own handwriting tucks you in. The blind becomes a duet. A blackout liner on the secret rod does the work. The cheerful patterned cloth becomes the top voice that looks after confidence. Between them lives a strip of felt that kisses the sill. You add 2 little cheeks at the jam so side light cannot creep in like a sibling after bedtime. You demonstrate the order. Inside first, outside second, and then let small hands show you back. A bedtime the child participates in is a bedtime that sticks. Mainstream fact perches on the toy shelf with the gravity of a wooden train. British blackout rules did not forbid all light within homes, but required that no light be visible from outside after lighting up time. Pamphlets advise drawing heavy curtains or blinds and screening children's rooms with particular care. Many households also taped windows and crisscross to reduce shatter from blast, and luminous strips, phosphorescent, not radioactive at home, marked light switches and door frames to prevent bumps in dark corridors. You, conscientiously dull, mark the nursery switch with a tiny painted dash low enough for small fingers. The nightlight problem, comfort versus common sense, asks for engineering. Paraffin nightlights salt the warden, electric ones preen. Both make halos if left near the blind. so you build a hooded firefly. A little shade you stitch from Blackout felt that perches over a battery torch like a modest hat. One slit faces the floor. Light spills in a puddle timid as a cat. You test with the warden's favorite trick. Hand up, palm toward the window, and nothing glows beyond your knuckles. The child accepts the firefly as a personal pet and promises to feed it the only food it wants, most of the time. You bring a spring rod the length of the cot and 2 lengths of calico, canopy pieces that clip onto the bedposts and fall in small, behaved curtains. Not for beauty, for draft taming and for that mercy called not seeing the corridor do its worrying. You sew a tiny loop at the corner where the favorite soft toy's paw can hold the curtain. On guard. Light joke 1. You award the toy the rank of Night Sergeant. It accepts, lies down on duty, and still receives excellent reports. The cupboard door has a keyhole that thinks itself theatrical. You resurrect your door eyelid, leather tongue under the escutcheon, cross of black sticking plaster, and the key learns new manners. The transom above, a little rectangle with ambitions, receives a felt bandage on a secret rod. The child is allowed to operate the bandage, because democracy at bedtime is not a bad theory. You pin a card low on the skirting, open 2 fingers at top right if hot, because midnight has rules the daytime brain forgets. Historians still argue whether Blackout childhoods made anxious adults or pragmatic ones. Did the nightly ritual of shutting out the world teach fear or competence? Whether the siren's 2 voices, rise, fall, echoed in later nerves, or became only the sound of tea being poured in a memory that learned to edit its own edges. They also disagree on whether play shelters and bed tents made by parents were brilliant comfort or premature fortifications of little heads. You decide that anything a child can assemble with snaps and a bedtime badge is a lesson in can do, not must hide. The badge is important. You cut a circle from felt, stitch on a tiny crescent, and print Sky Warden in letters that look like they will soon be traced over. Each night the child inspects your work, snap, 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 and inspects you. Did you leave any glows? And the badge sits on a shelf like a small constitutional monarchy keeping everyone honest. Quirky tidbit, you fasten the badge with a tiny safety pin that once held a laundry tag. The pin remembers duty and does not prick the citizen. You compose a lullaby of tasks that sounds like a slow knitting pattern. Left inner blind, right inner blind, cheeks, silk kiss, outer curtain, canopy ends, door eyelid, switch dash. The parent repeats it as if reciting a multiplication they've just learned to love. You write it on a card in the same ink you use for invoices, because bedtime is business and business is bedtime. The warden, called in for a peep at your new firefly, listens at the doorway, performs the palm test at the pane, and leaves with, if not a smile, at least the corners of his mouth temporarily unemployed. Light joke 2, the painted stars complain, in a voice only you can hear, that the felt clouds are stealing their applause. You promise a matinee after the war and charge the moon with reminding you. The moon, asked too many favors in this neighborhood, pretends to be behind the blackout and declines to answer. You keep a nursery salvage box under the work table, offcuts in cheerful shapes, a few finger guard strips for drawers that slam, a strip of mirror tape for the toy cupboard so the little torch has something to find without advertising to windows. You teach the child the count to 3 rule for the torch, 1 to look for bear, 2 to aim it at the book, 3 to off, and the torch accepts its demotion to tool with grace. You add a soft bell to the curtain tie so midnight mischief volunteers proof of movement. Mainstream aside, quietly amused, some parents swore by turning cot ends to face away from windows, by heavier bedspreads on blackout nights, by airing hour, after breakfast when curtains could yawn without scandal. You annex these into your doctrine. Cot turned, blanket tucked like a book in a shelf. Morning light allowed its good gossip for 15 minutes. The room smells happier for the bargain. When a bomb falls in another part of town and the railway rattles your customer's windows like a man who wants to argue, the child wakes just enough to ask, "Did the stars behave?" The parent points to the felled moons. They're still on duty, and the question falls asleep again. You were not present to hear this testimony, but you're told next day with a grateful press of the elbow as the child pins your badge to your sleeve and promotes you to deputy knight. You leave behind a small envelope with emergency moons, spare snaps, and a card titled, "When Your Arms Are Full." The card shows stick figure parent with a stick figure baby, using an elbow to nudge the inner blind and a toe to push the door snake back into humility. The child, observing the stick figures, insists on demonstrating. You applaud the choreography and make a note to teach toe snake to other buildings that haven't yet understood the art form. Historians still argue whether school drills, gas masks in little boxes, shelter practice, the insistence that courage is tidy, made bedtime braver or simply taught children adult voices too soon. Gas masks for toddlers came painted cheery in some districts. Mickey Mouse colors that look like circus and breathe like fish. And the cultural memory can't decide whether to smile or wince. Your jurisdiction is cloth. Masks are another office's business. You keep to your job, teach a window to be kind, a lamp to be modest, a star to accept a cloud. When the room passes the final dim test, hand up, palm toward the pane, nothing glows, you ask the child to test you back. They oblige with a seriousness that tightens your throat. "No glows," they pronounce, then whisper to the clouds, "Sleep tight," as if the felt had nerves and needed petting. You hand over the badge for pre-sleep display. It sits on a chair back, observing, dignified as a small plate with a moon painted on. Light joke 3. The night sergeant, soft toy, fails its first watch by falling over in the canopy and snoring faintly. You dock one imaginary current from its ration and tuck it more sternly under the loop. No further dereliction is observed out on your way out. You white pencil the edge of one step on the landing, the child's step, and write, very small, where only close eyes see it, "Mind!" The stairwell smells like laundry and resolve. The parent thanks you in the voice of someone who has stood at windows counting seconds between siren and sleep. You fold the oilskin around your patterns, tuck the emergency moons deeper into the satchel, and step into a hallway that has learned to hold its breath without panicking. Back at the shop, you stitch 2 more firefly shades, because the first was claimed by a cousin who teaches a child their letters with a torch under a blanket. You sharpen a pencil and write in your notebook, "Nursery, felt clouds over stars, firefly shade, canopy, 2 pieces, badge encourages obedience." Parent exhaled. You draw the badge in the margin, small and silly, then turn down the lamp until it looks like a secret. By the time you draw your own curtains, a neighboring window clicks its firefly off and the blackout becomes a single long breath the street shares. In some future the stars will have their matinee. Tonight they wear their coats and go to bed when told. You lie down and imagine the child pressing the snaps. Cloud, 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 and the room approving of its own dimness. Sleep arrives with its palm toward the window, and you pass. Shopfront glass loves an audience. Even in sober times it preens, bevels catching sun, prismatic tiles above doors scattering noon like a cheap cathedral, transoms with leaded scrolls that spell a shopkeeper's taste in curls. Under blackout orders, all that vanity must be taught manners. You arrive with a roll of serge, a notebook full of odd rectangles, a handful of spring rods, and the confidence of someone who has coaxed sulkier windows into bedtime. Street lamps outside are already hooded or dead. The pavements wear their white lips. Your job is to make the door panes and fussy transoms forget theatrical ambitions when night asks for anonymity. You start at the greengrocer's, whose double doors boast waist-high panes that make the street think it's invited in. By day he pins up a cheerful awning and hopes for cues. By night those panes glow like lanterns if he so much as turns on a back bulb. You measure each pane's recess, mercifully generous, and cut 2 skirts that ride just inside the glass on spring rods. They lift like tutus at opening time and drop at the turn of the key with a neat click. To tame the gap around the stile, use sew felt cheeks that sit behind the beading. The greengrocer, who can fold lettuces into rosettes blindfolded, learns to snap the skirts down one-handed while balancing a crate of apples. He performs the palm test with a pride that makes you fond. Door handles are chronic gossips. Around the spindle the light tries to flirt. You make little leather collars that button around the escutcheon and teach the latch to stop shining. The handles forgive you because leather makes everyone feel slightly important. For drafts that slide under the threshold like rumors, you fit a door snake on the inside, rolled serge with a lead-tape spine, then add a short apron that buttons to the lower rail and meets the snake like a handshake. You cut its hem on the slant so it kisses the floor without sulking on uneven boards. Mainstream Fact props a clipboard on the counter and writes tidily while you stitch. From September 1939, shop fronts and signage fell under the same "no visible light" rules as houses. Street lamps were extinguished or later hooded with narrow slits. Tramway and bus lights were masked. Shopkeepers were instructed to screen transoms, fanlights, and display cases after lighting up time, and many painted over prismatic glass or fitted hinged wood boards. Police and ARP wardens could find businesses showing a light. In response, 1,000 practical contrivances bloomed behind counters, removable panels by night, discreet rods behind leaded glass, felt-lined frames that dropped into place like shutters. The chemist 2 doors down presents a different problem: a bay window with curved glass, leaded lights above, and a door whose tiny beveled squares sparkle with bad intentions at dusk. You draft a pair of swing-arm frames, light battens covered in blackout serge, that hinge from the bay's posts and fold flat against the wall behind the window during the day. Come night, the arms swing in a slow embrace and fasten together with a brass turn button. One practiced flick and the whole window wears a modest coat. You pad the inner edges with wool tape so the glass won't bruise, and you cut a tiny flap at the bottom of one panel for a hatch, in case a late prescription must be passed out without letting the moon in. The chemist admires the hatch as if it were a new Latin name for discretion. Prismatic transoms above doors are the worst flirts. They were built to throw light sideways and up, little factory-made rainbows whose purpose is now exactly the opposite of your evening. Some streets paint them with a tarry dope. You have a gentler answer: a removable lintel bonnet. An L-shaped cover you pad with felt and hang inside, the long leg parallel to the glass, the short leg forming a baffle down the jamb. Light reaching the glass finds only the felt. Air, which likes right angles, slips around. You stitch the bonnet's edges with bias binding so it won't fray its dignity. You label its tags left first/right second because shop staff will be tired, and tired fingers appreciate manners written down. Quirky tidbit: hat blocks make excellent forms for tiny curved awnings. The milliner across the way loans you 2 wooden heads retired from close stays. You drape blackout cloth over the curves, steam with the iron, and shape a little eyebrow that screws into the top of a fanlight inside the shop. It creates a private crescent of darkness for the glass to hide behind. The milliner watches like a matchmaker and declares the marriage durable. You carry a length of bicycle inner tube coiled in your pocket. Cut into rings, it makes elastic that grips spring rods without muttering, and it holds turn buttons snug. Light joke 1. You tell the inner tube it has been demobilized from transport to decorum. It pretends to be offended and then works like a saint. By late afternoon you take your patterns to the fishmonger, whose door is mostly ambition and glass. Brine breathes. Light loves brine. Wardens hate both when combined after hours. You build a night mask, 2 felted panels hinged like a book, strapped top and bottom with webbing, buckled in 3 places so it can be put on as quickly as a man washing a counter. The mask meets the jamb with narrow magnetic cheeks you sewed into the edges. Magnets are a luxury, but you bought a handful from a radio repair man who swears by their virtues, and you are convinced. A click beats a swear word at closing time. Street lamps, or the lack of them, complicate your geometry. At corners where a hooded lamp throws one small obedient slot of light downward, you lengthen returns and pad the jambs so the thin beam doesn't creep sideways into glass. At dead dark stretches the problem becomes inward-facing, customers fumbling at knobs. You oblige with luminous paint, luminous, the phosphorescent domestic sort, not anything the chemist would label with a skull, dabbed on a discreet dot under the handle and a strip along the push plate. Mainstream aside, curbstones, step edges, and shelter entries were daubed with such paint or whitewash, as were bumpers, pram wheels, and the corners of handcarts. You paint a tiny arrow on the chemist's bell push that glows just long enough to be polite. Historians still argue whether the dark streets bred more accident than safety, whether the blackouts extinguishing of lamps raised pedestrian deaths and car collisions beyond what dim-out mitigations later saved, or whether the gradual shift to hooded lamps, white curbs, and disciplined driving restored equilibrium. They also debate whether shop-born, dim-outs, invited a trickle of crime or forged a street culture of watchfulness that discouraged opportunists. The record keeps both tendencies in tidy columns. You keep to your remit. Light that wants to talk to the sky must be persuaded to pen pal with felt instead. Sometimes you must be a carpenter in a hurry. The newsagent's transom is an ornery lozenge, and the panel must be rigid lest it sag into gossip. You build a single spar frame, one batten across the midline, cloth on both sides like a sandwich, edges bound, clips top and bottom. You attach a ribbon pull so it can be raised without fingers hunting in the dust. A child-appointed night monitor demonstrates the pull with theatrical gravity and is rewarded a barley sugar for competence. Light joke too, you give the ribbon a grand title. The commission for pulls, and it immediately ties itself into a knot like a minor official making work for itself. Inside the grocer's, the display case has a glass top that beams light straight to the ceiling when someone forgets and leaves the bulb on. For these you sew night aprons, flat black covers edged with tape that snap to tiny posts at the corners. The aprons store rolled on a dowel under the till. At closing, they unroll and fasten with a rhythm you teach to the junior clerk. Snap, snap, smooth, good. Where sloped glass resists, you add 2 small lead tape eyelids that rest on the incline and refuse to slide if brushed by sleeves. You keep a pocket rule for door labels. Nothing makes wardens kinder than seeing instructions on brown card in neat capitals. Drop night skirt before lighting / left panel first / door apron last. You add a line about fire exits. Do not cover push bar, and your pencil underlines it twice. You think of your hearth aprons at home and remember that safety is what manners look like when they grow muscles. The warden does his rounds with a new courtesy for shopkeepers who have to balance public and private dark. Torch slit, clipboard neutral, he stands at the apothecary's and performs the palm test. The leaded lights, bonnet and smug, reveal no pale gossip. He turns at the greengrocer's. The door skirts hang like habits. He writes, satisfactory, until the word becomes almost affectionate. When he reaches the fishmonger, the night mask has already learned its straps and buckles. He raises his palm, then, rare extravagance, says, very good. The fishmonger tries not to vibrate with pride. You pretend you don't hear and mend a thread. Quirky tidbit 2, prismatic pavement lights, those glass, coal holes, that bring daylight into cellars, become tiny stages at night. You cut circular felt plugs and stitch leather tabs to extract them at opening. For stubborn brass rings you carry a loop of string and a teaspoon. Loop under, spoon as lever, pop, out comes the stage. The seller ceases advertising its dreams to the street. Your teaspoon, promoted to engineering, returns to stirring tea with a smirk. Light joke 3. The baker asks if you can black out the scent of bread, because it keeps guiding late walkers like a dog. You suggest rationing adjectives at the window. No. Fresh. No. Warm. Only. Bread. He agrees, and the whole street pretends this will help. It does not. The scent remains a beacon. The warden, philosophically, writes no ticket for fragrance. By now your notebook reads like a taxonomy of door glass. Half-light panels, rod skirts, felt cheeks, bevel squares, bonnet lintel, prisms, swing-arm combs. You keep tissue patterns folded in a fat envelope labeled SHOP. Their edges smudged with soot and beeswax like campaign maps. You add a note about the bus stop round the corner, its number masked. You paint a white dash on the pole at hand height so fingers find the place to lean while waiting for the submarine bus with its hooded eyes. Mainstream aside, tucked into the margin with a calm hand. By 1944 the dim out returned a sprinkle of street lighting, hooded lamps with downward slits, and vehicles displayed masked lamps with cut-off beams. Shop windows sometimes kept internal shields permanently fitted to make closing rituals easier. But many streets kept their habits, curbs white, steps marked, doors labeled, long after bulbs brightened, because muscle memory is persuasive. When your last turn button is screwed home and the final ribbon labeled, you step back onto the pavement to see your work in its proper theater, the night. The shop fronts, once so eager to pose, now breathe with the discretion that suits them. They are not dead, they are simply private. A hooded lamp pours a small pool at the cross street where someone painted "shelter" with an arrow months ago. Your white curb at the chemist's catches just enough attention to save a shin. A child presses a nose to glass at the newsagent's by habit and finds her reflection instead of the light behind. She smiles and takes it as a compliment. Historians still argue whether the blackout taught streets to be tender with their edges or merely trained them to stand still. Whether the abaft lamps and curtain bays bred caution that later became courtesy, or whether the first neon after the war erased the manners like chalk under rain. You breathe and count 3 and decide the answer is in techniques. Once a street has learned how to put itself to bed, it never quite forgets, even when it stays up late. Doors remember their aprons. Hands remember their pulls. Warden knocks softened from duty into habit. You leave behind envelopes with spare snaps and a card that reads, in your tidy print, night dressing, Hermes/door, skirt/transom, bonnet/hatch, close, and in smaller letters, for breath, FLE open one finger. Shopkeepers tuck the cards under tills like lucky receipts. You whitewash the bottom step of the greengrocer's as a parting courtesy and add a tiny arrow pointing up with the single word mind, because steps and humans sometimes forget. Back at the shop, you stack the swing arm pattern against the wall, coil the inner tube rings in a jam jar labeled elastic retired bicycle, and hang the hat blocks on a high hook where they look like 2 modest moons. You add to the ledger. Shop fronts 4, transoms, bonnet, door skirts, obedient, warden, very. The cat, inspector emeritus, tests a rolled panel. It holds. You pour tea from the die captain, who whistles a lullaby for tired glass. When you draw your own curtains, the street has become a corridor of small, well-timed breaths. A tram hums with masked eyes. A bus shows its route number like a secret between friends. Behind you, the swing arms you loaned will fold every dusk and open every dawn until a day arrives when no one uses the word light discipline anymore. Until then, your stitches will keep shop fronts from telling the sky what the rooms are doing. You lie down, and the dark, stitched into place with patience and turn buttons, behaves like good cloth, hanging true, touching floor, minding its edges, letting the city sleep. Morning begins with arithmetic that pretends to be stationary. You unlock the till, lift the brown paper-wrapped ledger as if it were a loaf, substantial, comforting, likely to improve the day, and set out your small parliament. Coupon tin, coin tray, pencil stub with reliable morals, ink that smells faintly of officialdom, string, and the jam jar labeled hush where coal money naps until it's needed. The cat nominates herself auditor by sitting on the blotter. You thank her and slide her gently to miscellaneous expenses. The first customer brings a purse that looks like it knows all 14 verses of economizing. Out come the ration books. The clothing one with its tidy grid of squares, the fuel book with its crisp warnings. And you both lean over the counter, as if sharing cake. Curtain lining, she says. You ease open the clothing pages and count coupons like breaths. 1, 2, 3, and 2 half coupons that feel like cut flowers. You snip with the scissor dedicated to arithmetic, paste the pale rectangles to the docket with flour glue, and write the blessed numbers in your ledger. Utility lining, 3.5 coupons. Cash 2/6. Change 4D. Deliver Thursday. The page looks back at you with a face that isn't quite pleased but will behave in company. Mainstream fact sits up straight and clears its throat. Clothing rationing began in Britain in June 1941. Coupons governed garments and yard goods alike under the CC41 utility scheme, which guaranteed a minimum standard at controlled prices. Coal and coke were allocated by local fuel overseers, deliveries prioritized by need and season. Fuel and light. Restrictions tightened during 1941-42, and orders about hours of shop lighting and home consumption accumulated like paper snow. Later in the war, in 1944, the PYE system began deducting income tax from wages at source, the sort of modern efficiency that made ledgers neater and pockets sigh. You keep these dates not in your head but in pencil on the inside cover, useful as fence posts when a customer's memory asks for sympathetic anchoring. Coupons and coins dance an unromantic waltz. Some customers have coupons and no shillings, others shillings and not a square to spare. You become a broker of futures. For Mrs. Patel, binding today, coupons on Friday when her cousin's tailoring settles, you write IOU of coupons on a stout tag and hang it from a string on a nail you've christened the promise peg. For Mr. Hughes, hooks now, coins later, you take 4p from Hush with the solemnity of a small ceremony, and write in the ledger cold jar advance. Hooks, repaid in clips. The Hush jar does not rat you out. It is a silent partner whose interest rate is biscuits. Paperwork is not a bully in your hands. It is a set of manners. Dockets follow a sequence so predictable it soothes. Name at top left, address in letters that please postman, items listed with their new identities, bay returns 2, door skirt 1, transom bonnet 1, materials with lineage, utility sateen, tea-dyed chintz, reformed, felt, good, and beneath, the arithmetic that keeps you inside survival. Labor shillings, materials shillings, discount in biscuits, 1. You stamp paid when appropriate with a rubber stamp that used to say received and now says what you need, and you initial the bottom as if signing a treaty that saves a very small nation. Light joke 1. In a weak moment you carve a second rubber stamp from a pink eraser, very creditable, in honor of the warden's favorite compliment, and once, exactly once, you stamp it on your own ledger and blush as if you'd kissed yourself in public. The ledger forgives you. Coal money gets its own liturgy. Every time the jar is lightened you write in the margin, Hush, 1/ for scuttle. Later, when a customer slips 2 shillings into the same jar, for the common stove, you write Hush plus 2/ from an L. 14, thanks. The stove keeps no books. You do. In January, you turn accountant pharmacist and give the jar a prescription. Hold enough to keep the shop's iron from sulking. Hold back a shilling for the die captain's grudges. Never lend out so much that the room forgets how to be warm. Historians still argue whether the quiet ledgers of women's work, coupons counted, coal jars kept, off-cut swaps recorded on the back of envelopes, should be read as economic documents in their own right or as the soft edges of the real wartime economy. They debate whether these parlor accountancies were stopgaps or foundations. Did they simply tide households across absence, or build habits the welfare state later formalized? They note how PYE changed the feel of wage packets, how utility standardized the baseline of enough, and how both sat beside jam jars labeled hush where the math of neighborliness lived without a stamp. Your ledger offers no theory. It offers totals and notes that smell of soap. Some arithmetic happens with the back of the pencil as often as with the nib. You wipe soot with your thumb, count thread ends, tally minutes of treadling against the price of needles. The better scissors, in their sheath, represent an investment. You amortize them by not letting anyone cut paper and by pretending depreciation is just a rumor. When the machine needs a new belt, you take a deep breath, open the tin labeled belt fund, and find, because your neighbors are better than forecasts, a small miracle. Exact coins from 3 households tucked under a folded note that reads simply, for you. Quirky tidbit. You keep an abacus you bought for 6 pence from a school that had mislaid its pupils. You do not need it. But your hands love the click of beads when the day thinks it might fly off the table. Beads tally coupons left on a roll, minutes until the die captain must be minded, and how many currents the pin fine has levied at the communal table. You pay those out in laughter and pretend cake. The cat, auditor, bats a bead when she thinks you are getting ideas above your station. You thank her and return to base 10 like a citizen. Wages come in brown packets, thin as the papers that wrap notions. When they arrive, fortnightly if the shop's calendar feels generous, you take out the little you dare for the cold docket and tuck the rest into envelopes with stern faces. Rent, food, thread, unforeseen. An envelope labeled margin holds 1 threepenny bit and 2 stamps. Its existence makes you feel like a person who can look a week in the eye. PYE in its year begins biting the packet before it reaches you. Your ledger recalibrates its adjectives. Less. Wiggle. More. Plain. You do not resent arithmetic you can see. You do resent the pencil that breaks only during rent. Mainstream aside, purely practical. Utility ceiling prices make quoting less theatrical. You cannot please a bolt by flattery. You must obey the schedule. CC 41 labels on goods save arguments. It's utility, you say, and the room nods as if in a parish where the creed is posted by the door. When non-utility odds appear, an old velvet with dreams, you write discretionary in small letters and charge labor only. The ledger likes this compromise. It hums when the column adds up. You maintain 2 ledgers without admitting it, the one with pages and the one with favors. Favors are recorded in your head with a clarity shocking to those who have never been poor. Baker, clips now, hooks later. Warden, felt strip in pocket for dot cases, returns intelligence about latch that chews hems. Milliner, hat block for fanlight eyebrow, paid in netting offcuts to rescue a parade of parlor lampshades. When the column of favors gets tall on one side, you spend an evening sewing for that door, that fanlight, that back stair price. No more thanks, please. Light joke 2. A customer asks if you offer higher purchase on door snakes. You propose 3 easy payments of 1 biscuit each. She returns next week with 2, apologizes for arrears, and the snake in question curls at her ankle like a satisfied creditor. Receipts are their own little quilt. You write them on offcuts of pattern paper, brown, sturdy, incapable of melodrama, and tie them to parcels with string that recognizes gravity's opinions. Each bears the utility stamp when needed and, in the corner, a private hieroglyph that means, asked for advice and listened. People tuck the receipts into ration books as if they were the kind of paper an inspector might bless. Inspectors rarely see them, but the habit makes everyone stand straighter. Taxes are a rumor until they aren't. The day you sign a form that siphons a sliver before you touch it, you allow yourself one sigh and one chocolate square from the bar your cousin sent wrapped in a letter that smelled like coal and courage. Then you balance the new arithmetic by raising the price of labor not at all and the price of visible kindness not a whit. The cat, who has no tax obligations beyond purring, pays in naps. Historians still argue whether these micro-budgets, women's ledgers and notes pinned beside stoves, should be taught in classrooms as part of economic history rather than relegated to domestic arts. Some have begun to print the words household management in fonts as dignified as fiscal policy and industrial output. Others resist, preferring their graphs neat and their biscuits off the record. You sharpen your pencil and decide, as always, that the biscuit is policy. The warden appears at odd intervals with papers that need your table more than your needle. A circular explaining new dim-out hours, a form to request replacements for smashed panes, a schedule for shelter rotas. You read aloud to the queue and paste a copy inside your door where people can put their fingers on certainty. You underline in green the bit that reduces worry and fold down the corner on the paragraph that invites annoyance. Light joke 3. You propose a new ministry of plain English. The warden says it already exists and is underfunded. You promise to send them a door snake. Evening gives you the kind of quiet that lets columns add themselves. You rule lines with a steel square the machine has learned to fear. No one cuts near the ledger. And you total a day that looks like this. Coupons in 29. Coupons promised 7. Cash 17/9. Hush -1/6 then +2/. Labor hours 9. Pins lost 0. Claimed. Praise offered 4 remarks creditable. Earns 2. You glue a current, just 1, above the line for humor, then eat it for courage. Because post-war accounting will not include this column and you prefer not to spoil your reputation for professionalism. You balance the promise peg before you go, lift each tag, read the names like prayers, and check your own pockets for the missing half coupon you swear you saw earlier. It turns up in the box with the felt moons, as if trying to enlist. You restore it to its regiment and lock the tin. The cat, auditor, inspects the hush jar, taps it once with a paw, and looks satisfied in a way no inspector ever will be. You close the ledger, tie it with string as if it were a parcel of cents, and put it on the shelf above the machine where heat will not curl its pages. On the walk home you think in columns without numbers. Windows past inspection, stair remembers door snake, nursery learned its lullaby, shop fronts wear their modesty like well-cut coats. You count breath, not coins. Your finger writes a line in the evening air that says simply, sufficient. It's not a boast, it's a receipt the night signs for .at home. You open your private ledger, the one that fits in a pocket, write. Coal, fair, tea, adequate, customers, patient, jokes 3, and add a drawing of the cat with a monocle labeled auditor, self-appointed. You draw your curtains, which cost nothing tonight because they have already been paid off with patience, and listen to the city audit itself with silence. The columns add to sleep. You stamp your pillow paid and mean it. The city keeps 2 clocks at night, one for work, one for drills, and you learn to read both without making a fuss. Needle going steady, kettle thinking about its future. You hear the first thin rise of the siren the way a bird hears weather turning. It isn't a shout, not at first. It is a line being drawn on the evening. You set your scissors down as if they were sleeping children, check that the lampshade still behaves like modesty, and reach for the kettle with the reflex that proves you are British and alive. Tea is not a panic, it is a tactic. Practice nights have their choreography. The warden's knock, courteous as always, gains a syllable of urgency. You answer with the door on its chain and a nod that says you've ironed your courage. Drill, he murmurs, and the word folds the room into a useful shape. You clip the last panel, nudge the door's snake into its assigned dignity, and pin a paper on the counter for anyone late and anxious. Close for practice. Please knock like a person. In the alley, buckets find their place in the bucket line. Sand, water, a stirrup pump whose leather cup has learned to like paraffin. You tie back your hair with the same ribbon you use for hems and arrange your thimble where your hand will remember it even if your mind forgets manners. Sirens speak two dialects, the rising wail of something in the sky, and the steady all clear that sounds like a long, unfrightened exhale. Mainstream fact sits calmly by the kettle. Britain's air raid warning system standardized its signals in 1939. Alert, by up and down wail from electric sirens or hand-cranked models. All clear, by steady tone, relayed to police, ARP posts, and factory whistles. In later years the immediate danger message sometimes arrived by Maroons for parachute mines. Fire guards drilled with stirrup pumps and sand to smother magnesium incendiaries. And by 1941, the fire watcher's order required designated watchers in shops and blocks to attend roofs and yards during alerts. You keep your copy of the order under the counter like a sensible umbrella. The street becomes a classroom without blackboards. On the corner, the baker's wife, helmet slightly too big, dignity exactly right, demonstrates the pump's rhythm: down, up, aim, breathe. You take a turn, and the pump rewards aim with a clean arc that lands in the tray of water and not, as last week, on Mr. Hughes's shoes. Light joke 1. You apologize to the shoes in absentia. They send a note, via their owner, forgiving you on condition you draw their laces tighter next time. The sand bucket receives its ceremonial stir. The scoop, not the swish, is what matters, because magnesium loves attention and must be smothered like gossip. Your hands memorize heft the way they memorized hems. 2 scoops smooth, don't pat. Tea breaks thread the drill like commas. The WVS van may or may not appear, a mobile urn bearing comfort and sentences that begin, "Come on, love." When it does, enamel mugs blossom on doorsteps. Yours lives on the shop shelf between chalk and pins. You pour, you pass. The warden's pencil rests its head on the cup rim like a tired mast. You add a sugar that isn't really sugar, saccharin tablets that taste faintly of resolve, and the taste is still tea, because you say so together. The kettle returns to its trivet with the contented sigh of a thing that has found its verb. Inside the shop, the thimble keeps time against the table. Tap, tap, pause, while you and the neighbors review the ritual in low voices. Doors, skirts, transoms, bonnet, vents, dogleg, one finger open. Children, badges pinned, fireflies hooded. You check the stove damper and the iron's plug. You label the plug with a loop of tape so a sleepy hand can pull it in the dark without hunting. A list you wrote last month earns a small tick for each item, and you borrow the warden's stamp, satisfactory, and press it onto the margin for the pleasure of ceremony. Light joke 2, you suggest a stamp that reads, "Morale, acceptable." The warden says the ministry would require a committee to approve the font. Historians still argue whether drills preserved competence or merely rehearsed fear, whether the muscle memory of buckets and torches saved roofs, or whether people loved their routines because routines were a harbor when the horizon misbehaved. They debate the blitz spirit, whether it was a pose for cameras or a habit of small kindnesses that did not need cameras. The arguments are tidy, the nights weren't. You've learned that a practiced hand is calmer than an unpracticed one, and calm puts out fires faster than drama. Sometimes the siren pauses for real work. On one evening this guy writes a paragraph elsewhere and leaves your street to the margin notes. You keep to your station at the back door, yard, stairwell, coal chute square, torch shaded, listening to the roof as if it could speak honestly about sparks. The neighbors move as if in a waltz learned from the same teacher. Even the cat, indignant at being denied the alley, patrols the shop with its tail lowered like a responsible flag. You keep the kettle on a slow breath, because knowing hot water awaits is the sort of bravery you can pour. Quirky tidbit: thimbles make decent whistle stoppers. A warden's pea whistle shrieks at the wrong hour. Tiny crack in the ball, and someone's aunt, who knows more about haberdashery than hydraulics, jams a thimble over the mouthpiece to tame the thing. The result is a dignified peep that won't alarm babies and will still summon a bucket line. You later polish the thimble and return it with a bow. The warden, startlingly formal, salutes the sewing department of the war effort. Between drills you practice the other rituals that keep tempers from bruising. You chalk a tiny crescent on the inside of the shop bell, turn bell sideways during alerts, to prevent accidental ringing that draws the curious like moths. You replace one cracked bucket with a biscuit tin repurposed for sand. It works remarkably well and looks even better, because dignity is both morale and decoration. You shake out the door snake, fluff its chaff, and massage the lead tape in its spine so it remembers to lie down and not attempt heroics against the draft. Mainstream aside, part steam, part ink, incendiary bombs, small and bright, taught whole roofs the use of sand. Water made magnesium worse, a party trick everyone pretended to enjoy learning only once. Stirrup pumps, portable, two-person, became street instruments, their leather cups kept supple with oil. Fire guards watched in pairs, then, under the 1941 order, in larger rotas by roof and block. And all of it ran better with tea, canteens and WVS vans that became famous for showing up wherever the night was complicated. You sign the neighborhood rota under Tuesdays after siren until all clear. With a smiley face you immediately scratch out. The warden pretends not to have seen. Inside, the thimble's rhythm returns to its quieter meaning. A neighbor mends a sleeve while the alert stretches time thin. You tack a lining where a hem sulked last week. Someone irons a patch with an iron you move to the back to keep it from conducting gossip through the front glass. The siren's wail holds like a long note in a church. You answer with a domestic chord, steam, stitch, pour. None of it is heroics. All of it is civilization rehearsing itself so it won't forget its lines in the morning. Light joke 3. The pump crew votes to name the stirrup pump Hector, says the baker, because it has warlike intentions. Mabel, says Mrs. Patel, because it needs oil and attention. You compromise on Abel, which pleases the warden because it sounds like an alphabet and doesn't commit the pump to gender. The pump, characteristically silent, produces a respectable stream in appreciation. When the all clear finally arrives, steady note, truth spoken in one breath. The street loosens as if a belt were unbuckled at a Sunday tea. You resist the urge to applaud. Instead you pin a card to the inside of your door, all clear, brew on, and open to the friends who have earned enamel mugs. The WVS van creaks at the corner, and someone produces the last of a jam ration with a ceremonial flourish. Thimbles, relieved of their whistle duties, return to fingers. The warden, who has a face that looks carved for seriousness, allows himself the smallest quirk at the corner of his mouth when a child salutes him with a biscuit. After drills come inventories. You count the sand scoops like stitches, enough, nearly enough, and mark the bucket with chalk where nearly needs to become plenty by morning. You lay the pump handle down parallel to its tin. Habit, and hang your helmet on the nail that remembers your height. You ring up nothing on the till and write everything that matters on the blotter. Siren, 25 minutes. TA, 6 mugs. Pump, able. Shoes, dry. Jokes, 3, fit for print. Historians still argue whether night drills hardened or softened the home front, whether they taught obedience that later soured into bossiness, or fellowship that later sweetened into councils and committees that didn't hate meetings quite as much. Whether the practice made people strangers to fear or simply competent in its company. You decide drills are thimbles, small, practical, a little silly when discussed, perfect when needed. When the neighbors drift back to their doors, you stand in yours and feel the street breathe its steady post-chorus breath. The hooded lamp above the bus stop throws its polite coin of light. The white curb you tend looks like a smile meant for tired ankles. You thank the warden with a nod that says both. See you on Tuesday. And, please, not too many Tuesdays. He returns the nod with one that answers, I'll take what comes. The cat, who has slept through most of civilization, stretches and inspects the door snake, approves, and resumes her contribution to morale, purring. You draw your curtain an inch, then two, then all the way, hands remembering last week's hymn. The kettle, extrovert that it is, begs for one more song. You let it whistle for 3 seconds and then shush it with a lid. You sip, stare at the seam of dark where fabric meets wall, and feel the quiet take hold like a good stitch under a hot iron, flat, sure, unobtrusive. Somewhere, a child pins on a felt cloud because the drill made bedtime feel official. Somewhere else, a pump named Abel dries its feet. You add a line to the ledger before sleep steals the pencil. Drill, done, TA, adequate, thimbles, Multero, city, behaving. You underline behaving and mean not just the curtains and the doors, but the bones of the place. The stairs that carried buckets, the hands that found each other's cups, the voices that saved volume for sirens and spent the rest on instruction. You lie down in the dark, which you have taught all week, behaves for you, quiet as a well-mended seam, soft as steam leaving a spout, strong as a pump handle in the right palms. The all-clear is a sound that learns to take off its hat. The first nights you heard it, you stood straighter from ankles to ears and thought, now? Later, it became something like a good neighbor leaving a pie on your step, modest, practical, a promise that ovens will be useful again. Years work their patience stitched through the street. Sirens grow infrequent, then ceremonial, then stories. The warden's notebook goes tidy with fewer lines and finally takes a holiday. His knock, when it comes, is social, a cup of tea knock. Windows relearn light in cautious degrees, dim out to brighter, slits to circles, circles to which he used to call evening, which now feels extravagantly named, and the curtains? They have a second life planned without telling you. Utility satines and tea-brown chintzes have been soldiers long enough. They queue, politely, for demobilization. You take down panels that know your hands better than certain cousins do and lay them on the work table with the tenderness you might extend to a coat that carried letters through rain. You unhook the respectable returns and smooth the hems where lead tape lived like a spine. You touch the corners that stopped gossip and feel them relax into mere geometry. A city's discipline exhaled through cloth, and now cloth would like to rest. Rest, but not retirement. Your first promise is quilts. Not show quilts with opinions, comfort quilts with memory. You unpick seams in long, unhurried lines, counting stitches like days of a calendar you survived. Utility blackouts become the backs, sober and strong. The fronts are pieced from saved scraps with improved manners. A square of reformed roses no longer shouting. A rectangle of nursery moons that behaved. Door skirt serge that once kept drafts from narrating themselves. You stitch in rows that do not require attention and find that attention attends anyway. The thimble taps a slow heartbeat. The treadle hums in a key the cat approves. Mainstream Fact places a folded newspaper on the table and nods at the advertisements growing in its margins. After 1945, coupons receded, gradually, stubbornly. Clothing rationing lingered until 1949 in Britain. Utility goods outlasted the peace because fairness takes time to wean. Many households turned wartime textiles into peacetime comforts. Quilts, pram blankets, cushion covers, even aprons that wore their former purpose like a comic backstory. Women's magazines of the late 40s offered bright ideas with blackout cloth, preaching economy with a smile that forgot nothing of austerity's teeth. Make do and mend did not close shop overnight. It put its tools in a new drawer labeled sensible anyway. You stitch a border from the remains of a transom bonnet and laugh when you remember the chemist's solemn admiration for the prescription hatch. You work a line of hand quilting through a strip that once lived as a shopfront's eyebrow, hat block-shaped, steamed at midnight, and you can still smell the faint ghost of beeswax if you pretend. Quilting is not just warmth, it's storage, a calmer way to keep the city's muscle memory close by. When a child asks what the little black squares are, you say, X windows, and the child, who likes uniforms, accepts the rank with respect. Light joke 1, you threaten to embroider a tiny slit torch on the corner of a quilt as a badge. The warden, retired to gentler routes, suggests instead a palm stitched in white. You agree on a compromise, a discreet stitched comma, because pauses were your specialty and commas hold gentle authority. Linings, too, learn new jobs. Blackout panels that kept parlor lace from behaving like skylights become the backs of bookcases that were always too honest about scrapes and scuffs. Door skirts, snake-spined and loyal, unroll into draft stoppers for peacetime windows that still think February should be theatrical. A pair of concertina skylight blinds become, after an afternoon with bias binding and a new humility, splendid laundry bags that hang like retired officers in a scullery. You keep one apron of hearth blackout because ashes are not a wartime idea. Even peacetime coal has opinions. Historians still argue whether post-war domesticity swallowed wartime ingenuity or digested it into something useful. Did households drop the habit of mutual aid when neon returned? Or did the muscle learn cooperation and carry it into tenants' associations' school fairs? The quiet empires of PTA and parish? They produce minutes from meetings and photos of bring-and-buy tables like quilts of civic participation. Some say the utility aesthetic nudged Britain toward good honest design, Scandinavian dreams in British rooms, while others insist chintz mounted a counteroffensive as soon as coupons were buried with a small speech. Your shop, newly careless about daylight, sells both tape for tidy lines and ribbon for flounce, and refuses to be drawn into a dialectic. Houses are bilingual. They always were. Quirky tidbit, you discover that blackout cloth makes excellent puppet theater backdrops. The tenement children acquire a stage from 2 chairs and a curtain rod. Your offcuts become forests, castles, a seaside that smells vicariously of coal. A felt moon, retired sergeant, takes a bow nightly and is never late for its cue. The baker's wife supplies dialogue when a sock puppet loses its nerve. The warden, asked to play a dragon, says, I only read stage directions, and then proves all the best dragons do exactly that. You keep your ledgers, even now, when PYE behaves without argument and Hush no longer holds a jar of neighbors' coins so much as a habit of covering the kettle first. The promise peg empties slowly. The last tag to come down says, in your tidy script, I owe you, lights when the time comes. You fetch a little tin of whitewash, move to the step, and paint over the word shelter, with a formality that surprises your hand. Then you repaint the curb white anyway, not because shins require the courtesy but because a small white lip pleases the eye like clean punctuation. The shop fronts take off their bonnets in stages. The swing arms fold less often. The greengrocer leaves his night skirts rolled, then folded, then remembering only on Thursdays. The chemist keeps his hatch because he loves a thing that worked. You help unscrew turn buttons and label them in envelopes in case the world grows a mood again. You stack baffles in a cupboard labeled dog legs, generous, as if generosity has a supply chain, and you keep one in the parlor because rooms have memories and breath still needs polite lanes. Mainstream aside, factual and gentle, by late 1944 many towns shifted from full blackout to dim out. August 1945, news of surrender let lights bloom. By September, blackout regulations were lifted in most places, though odd patches kept their habits until bulbs were available and paint forgiven. People remember the first nights of light like first springs, neighbors walking the streets looking up as if the sky had been promoted. There are photos of Piccadilly with neon practicing pronouns again, faces lifted as if grammar mattered. Your street's return is quieter, lamps minding their own business, rooms discovering they can be seen and choosing, now and then, to show off. Light joke 2, the cat, retired auditor, takes up a new post as quilt inspector. She specializes in testing the thermal properties of anything laid flat and feels her contribution substantial. You sew a tiny paw into one border and pretend it's a maker's mark. Sewing circles continue, tonic shifted from must to may. The communal hem bar becomes an ironing rail for charity shop refurbishments. The compliments book, once fed by creditable, now collects pretty and clever and very occasionally saucy, which you allow on Thursdays. Children who once counted themselves in yards now count themselves in inches of cake. They bring you their first pockets to mend and accept your doctrine. Stitches remember moods. The baker still finds for drop pins, one current, though now he stocks currants aplenty, and the fines are mostly a ritual to keep gravity honest. You make a peacetime badge and pin it to the white painted step, mind. It meant, lift your feet. Once, it means that and also, mind each other. Now. The warden, in plain hat, steps over it and taps the word with his shoe. He brings no notebook, only his hands, which have remembered how to be empty. You hand him a parcel wrapped in brown paper with string, a retiring gift years late. Inside, a little pillow stitched from the first blackout you ever hung, embroidered with a palm and one small stitched comma. For naps, you say. He nods, because there are not adjectives for that kind of sentence. Historians still argue whether the home front's craft should live in museums behind glass or in kitchens under magnets, whether your patterns on brown paper belong in archives or in drawers still sprinkled with flour and chalk dust. You imagine a kind archivist someday reading your notes. I'd 2 for rainy Tuesdays, and smiling at the way a seamstress wrote time into cloth. You tuck your best templates into a folio and write, with unscientific pride, patterns that taught US manners. If no one ever opens it, the name will serve as a label on the inside of your own head. Light joke 3, you consider writing a final pamphlet. Make do and mend, and then make cozy, with chapters on converting blackout to breakfast, and how to thank a curtain politely. You draft an introduction, lose it under the cat, and decide the pamphlet has already been published in quilts and door snakes that lounge under doors like retired colonels. At days and the shop learns a slower breath. You leave the lamp unhood and it remembers how to glow without apology. You fold the final quilt and throw it over the back of the chair that saw more war than chairs are meant to see. The kettle sings a note free of orders. Outside, a bus announces its number loudly, as if practicing for audiences. Inside, the last seam lies down flat under the iron as if it had always planned to understand this line of work. Perhaps it had. You put the ledgers side by side, war beside peace, and tie them loosely together with string you do not pull tight, because the knot is only for tidiness, not for binding. Before bed, you do a small, unnecessary thing. You hang one of the old felt moons in the window, daytime side in, night side out, not to instruct the stars. There's no need tonight, but to remind yourself that instruction was, for a while, the difference between panic and sleep. The moon swings a little, approving. You draw the curtains, the gentler post-war pair, lined because you cannot imagine a window without a conscience, and the room changes key to the old forgiving F. The city rests, louder now, but no less itself. You lie down and feel the quilts do their duty, the way a street does when it has learned to lower its voice without losing its humor. Let the room soften by inches, like thread eased back into a needle case. The kettle has said its last agreeable syllable and sleeps. The scissors lie with their mouths respectfully closed. The tape measure curls, tame as a contented cat, remembering every sill and shoulder it ever measured. Light steps back a pace and then another, generous now, no need for orders before it behaves. The window, which has known both swagger and silence, rests under curtains that remember duty and lean toward comfort, the way a person leans when the chair is familiar. Your breath finds that sewing room tempo, slow draw, small pause, easy release. The rhythm that let hems become laws and quilts become kindness. Picture the felt moon, retired from policing and promoted to decoration, gently swaying against the pane. See how its edge paints a pale, round hush on the cloth, not bright, simply present. The sounds outside arrive already folded, a bus that thinks of mornings, a distant door that opens like a polite sentence, someone laughing in a key that doesn't wake anyone. If a thought knocks like a warden, let it tap twice and then answer later. For now, the ledger lies closed with its string unknotted, promises kept, columns adding to. Enough. The hands that pinned and unpinned, that held the palm to glass and waited for no glow, can let go of the window and keep only what's needed, the memory of competence, which is a gentler blanket than worry. The city breathes, not the shallow blackout breath of caution, not the ragged breath of sirens, but the easy, post-tea breath of rooms that have learned their own size. Inhale to 4, as if counting coupons in a calmer year. Hold to 2, the length of a soft nod. Exhale to 6, like a seam pressed flat, weight and warmth doing their quiet work. Let shoulders settle like folded cloth. Let thoughts stack themselves into tidy piles and then blur at the edges, like chalk after a long day. Somewhere, a quilt stitched from obedient nights keeps someone else warm. Here your pillow takes that job. Sleep steps through the shop door you've left ajar in the mind, flips the little sign to close, and turns out the lamp with the gentlest touch, practiced and sure.